Chapter 70. With Yi Qian's words, Xia Jinyuan no longer had to hide his footsteps in the dark. He assumed the role of Liao Yud and hurriedly walked up the stairs. The man who was waiting for them did not suspect anything. He took out a lighter and was about to light the way for them when he said, "Doctor, take your things and watch your step." The lighter lit up for less than half a second. Xia Jinyuan, who was wearing combat gloves, reached out his hand at lightning speed to extinguish the light. At the same time, he quickly covered the other party's mouth. He stepped forward and slithered his left hand behind the man's head like a snake. After a muffled sound, the stairs returned to silence. The light flickered again. Yi Qian, who was waiting, saw Xia Jinyuan with a cold expression make a gesture to move forward. When the light went out, she held Dr. Zhou's hand and said softly, "Auntie, there's one last step." The last step was to rush into the room where Brother Fei was hiding and take control of the suspect. The second floor of Spring Sun Hotel was the accommodation. There were only 5 rooms in total. Xia Jinyuan received a report from the soldiers who had infiltrated the second floor. Several waiters had been taken control of, and the target's room was locked in the second room on the second floor. Yi Qian took the initiative to approach Xia Jinyuan, who was hiding against the wall. Just as she reached out her slender fingers, they were grabbed by his strong hand and a hand signal was sent over. "Second floor, second room, 2 people." Yi Qian's voice changed to that of Enrich. She came up and complained, "If I knew this would happen, would have brought a flashlight. Why didn't I light a candle when it's so dark?" Standing in the second room, she sounded even more dissatisfied. "Uncle Yud, where are you going? I brought you a flashlight. Why are you so nosy?" Liao Yud's voice rang out. Then, the sound of jogging footsteps gradually faded away. The soldiers who were hiding in the dark were stunned. Xia Jinyuan pursed his lips with a cold expression. He could not help but chuckle as Enrich talked about this person and that person. Her acting was indeed very convincing. Dr. Zhou wanted to laugh too, but he could not bring himself to do so at a time like this. He raised his hand and knocked on the door. "Do you want to see a doctor? You didn't even open the door." He spoke with a town accent. "Of course. Otherwise, why would I ask you to come here?" This time, Yi Qian was imitating the voice of the man who had been killed by Xia Jinyuan. Inside, Brother Fei, who was lying on the bed, finally opened his mouth. "Light the candle and let the doctor in." There was finally a faint candlelight in the dark room. The candlelight illuminated a corner of the room, revealing Brother Fei's pale and weak face. He said to the man who was protecting him 24 hours a day, "Go and keep an eye on the doctor's daughter. Let the bastard bring the doctor in." He gnashed his teeth as he spoke, his eyes filled with ferocity. The moment the door opened, Yi Qian reacted quickly and pulled Dr. Zhou to the side, giving the front of the room to the soldiers who were ready to attack. Xia Jinyuan, who was standing in front of the door with a gaze as sharp as a sword, raised his right leg and kicked fiercely at the open door. After a loud bang, the wooden door flew into the room. The speed of the kick was fast and fierce. Yi Qian, who was pressed against the wall, felt a strong gust of wind blow past his face. He felt a slight pain. Chapter 71. Dr. Zhou leaned against the wall with his back drenched in cold sweat as he shouted, "Don't move." He slowly sat down on the cold floor. Wind blew out from the room without a door. Yi Qian, who had just heaved a sigh of relief, froze. How could the night wind blow out from the room with the windows tightly shut? She seemed to have thought of something and suddenly shouted, "Xia Jinyuan! Downstairs!" She dashed out of the room like an arrow. She was so fast that Xia Jinyuan did not even have a chance to speak. He pressed down on his headset and listened to the report from his comrades behind the house. As he chased after Yi Qian, he ordered in a deep voice, "Take control of the target and escort her away overnight. Battalion Commander Yang, notify the Power Supply Bureau to restore the electricity." Less than 10 seconds after he gave the order, the lights flickered briefly and the electricity supply in Fujian town was restored. Xia Jinyuan, who had chased her all the way to the restaurant lobby, slowly stopped under the bright lights. He quietly looked at the slender figure standing at the entrance of the restaurant. After a while, he slowly walked over and said with a smile, "Weren't you very powerful just now? Why do I feel like you're disappointed?" Sigh, a little girl will always be a little girl. She may be good, but she's still a child. Her little face was just like the weather in June. It could change at any moment. He chased her to the first floor. Yi Qian could already tell whose footsteps it was. After a moment of silence, she sighed softly and looked up at him with her bright black eyes. "I see the difference between us. The difference between us. How old am I? How old are you?" Xia Jinyuan, who was choked by her words, suddenly burst into laughter. He looked at her serious face and could only stop laughing. He coughed dryly and comforted her. "You're already very good. Your ventriloquism stunned my comrades. How old am I? You'll be scared to death if I tell you." Yi Qian pursed his lips as he looked at Xia Jinyuan, who had suddenly become an understanding soldier. His eyes flickered before a smile slowly appeared on his beautiful face. "It's not a matter of age. It's related to the environment." No matter what she had learned, she was still one step behind since she had never received a systematic command education. That was why she panicked when she saw her target jump out of the window. Who was Xia Jinyuan? How could he not have made arrangements? It has something to do with the environment. Xia Jinyuan raised his eyebrows and thought for a while before nodding. He smiled and looked at the little girl in front of him who was very good at reflecting on her shortcomings. He answered her seriously, "It does have something to do with the environment, but in the end, it still depends on one's hard work. Now that you have a first-grade sergeant major and a world-class sniper to nurture you, your environment is already better than many people in this world. They created the environment, and you have to work harder." As he spoke, his voice suddenly became very serious. "They have put a lot of effort into you, so you have to cherish it. Also, I have to remind you that if you want to become a soldier, you have to first understand the meaning of obedience." He was going to settle scores with her. Yi Qian quietly took a step outside. He had only taken one step when Xia Jinyuan grabbed his arm. "Are you trying to slip away?" Chapter 72. Her attitude of admitting her mistake was good, but it was useless in front of him. "You ran down in such a hurry because you were worried that the target would escape. I can understand your intentions." Xia Jinyuan curled up the corners of his mouth and looked at the girl in front of him, who had a pair of starry eyes. His faint smile had a hint of banter. "Your attitude of admitting your mistake is also very good. Are you afraid that I will scold you?" "What am I afraid of? I'm not your soldier." Yi Qian, who had a cold gaze, smiled and said, "Besides, I did go to look for my classmate. I just happened to run into Auntie Zhou. So what if she ran down?" He had already set up an inescapable trap. There was no way he would let Brother Fei escape by jumping out of the window. He was just overreacting. Her answer made Xia Jinyuan raise his eyebrows. Then, there was a hint of calmness in his dark and cold eyes. Looking at her, his smile faded a little and he said calmly, "If you were my soldier, Yi Qian, you would end up in a miserable state. There is a rule in military law that states that soldiers who disobey orders and act willfully will be punished with a warning, a serious warning, a demerit, or a major demerit depending on the severity of the situation. At the mention of military law, his expression inevitably became stern. After he finished speaking, Xia Jinyuan, who had been paying attention to Yi Qian's expression, slowly smiled again. So, Yi Qian, if you want to become a qualified soldier, obeying orders is the first thing you need to learn. When he smiled, he looked even more handsome and elegant. His cold temperament also gained the elegance of a noble young master when he smiled. He was a man who could not hide his nobility even though he was wearing a military uniform. How could he have grown up in an ordinary environment? Every place had its own people. That was why the environment was so important. Thank you for your advice. I understand. Yi Qian nodded gently and took his advice to heart. A soldier's duty is to obey orders. Headmaster Chen and Grandpa Zhen had both personally said this before. However, she had placed her focus on improving her own abilities and had forgotten about this most basic awareness that she should have. The sound of footsteps could be heard. It was the soldiers upstairs. Reporting, the second floor has been cleared. Inform the police to seal off the scene. His smile faded, and a cold expression appeared between his elegant brows. He turned around, and his straight back already carried the piercingly cold aura of a soldier. Gather, withdraw. Yi Qian looked over his shoulder and saw that the soldier standing in front of him had a cold expression on his face. From his serious and meticulous attitude, he could tell that he was absolutely obedient to Xia Jinyuan's orders. Yi Qian pursed his lips slightly. A soldier's duty was to obey orders. Perhaps she understood. Yi Qian's eyes narrowed as he looked at his towering figure. A man like him would not only be able to convince his soldiers with his abilities, but he would also be able to convince his soldiers in all aspects. After everything was arranged, Xia Jinyuan led Yi Qian and Dr. Zhou out of the restaurant. Chapter 73. Dr. Zhou was slightly older than the rest. She hurriedly said, "Don't worry, we will keep this matter to ourselves and will not spread it. You are a doctor and have the noble professional ethics of a doctor. We naturally believe in Dr. Zhou." Xia Jinyuan said gracefully. In front of the people, his attitude was not as cold as steel, but as gentle as a breeze. "I won't see you too often. Once again, I'm very sorry." Xia Jinyuan arranged for a soldier to send Dr. Zhou away first. After she walked further away, he suddenly raised his hand and flicked Yi Qian's forehead lightly. "I didn't have time to praise you just now. You did well, little girl. You really flicked me." Yi Qian was caught off guard and was flicked directly. She held her aching forehead and there was a slight ripple in her indifferent eyes. "This is nothing. One moment you praise me, the next moment you punish me." Xia Jinyuan was already laughing. He was a man who was very good at restraining himself. Even if he was happy, his laughter was low and shallow, and it was refreshing in the night. "You are only 14, not 40. Relax, don't show too much indifference in your eyes. 14 years old is the rainy season. I'm guessing that Captain Xiao's 14 years old is not the rainy season either. There is no indifference in his eyes, but at least he looks unattainable." Facing the unpredictable Major, Yi Jian decided to give him a taste of his own medicine. Would a 20-year-old Major live a 14-year-old life like a blooming and rainy season? Was it possible? Thinking about his 14 years old, Xia Jinyuan tactfully kept his mouth shut. The girl in front of him was really smart. It was better for him to say less, in case she made him feel angina. He waved at the soldier who was waiting for his orders. Come. Send this student back to the recruit assembly camp." He was only 14 years old. No wonder Old Master Xia and Old Master Xia said he was difficult to deal with every day. The 20-year-old himself met the 14-year-old Yi Qian, who was also a difficult girl to deal with. Sigh, he suddenly wanted to call back to ask about old Master Xia and apologize. Xia Jinyuan made a phone call to Beijing after they got into the car that escorted the suspects back to the city. In the heavily guarded military compound, in a quaint military compound covered with creepers outside, a guard picked up the phone. After greeting him, he trotted upstairs and gently knocked on the door. "Commander-in-Chief," the major called and said that he has something urgent to report to you. At 10:30 in the evening, Commander-in-Chief Xia, who had always been on time, jumped out of bed when he heard the call. This guy had never taken the initiative to call. Could it be that something had happened to him in the team? What happened? As soon as he opened his mouth, he suddenly heard the words, "Old man, I'm sorry. I suddenly feel that being 14 years old really makes people worry." Commander-in-Chief Xia had the urge to smash the phone. It turned out that he had been worried for nothing. "Brat, just you wait. Old man, send my regards to old Master Xia. Also, good night." Xia Jinyuan smiled and hung up the phone. Commander-in-Chief Xia was in good health and full of energy. "Brat. Can't sleep in the middle of the night." It seemed that he had to make a call and increase his workload. He was always so frivolous. Chapter 74. Xia Jinyuan had always been difficult to deal with. When he was young, he would ask all sorts of questions, and when he grew up, he would still ask all sorts of questions. It was fine if he asked, but he would always ask questions that were difficult to answer. In the eyes of everyone in the family Xia, Xia Jinyuan was the little demon king of family Xia. However, this little demon king was admitted to the military academy in one go, and had performed meritorious deeds several times. He became a major at the age of 20, becoming the youngest major in the family. With such a promising son, Commander-in-Chief Xia could be said to have swept away his previous dispiritedness. When Xia Jinyuan was 14 years old, he had always been proud and elated. This was why, even if he was startled by Xia Jinyuan's inexplicable phone call, he would not be angry. Contact Political Commissar Zhang of the Nongguang military region. Commander-in-Chief Xia turned around, went into his room, put on his military jacket, and then went to the study. The troops deep in the mountains of Fujian town belonged to the Nongguang military region. The night grew darker, and in the latter half of the night, fog began to appear. Standing in front of the window, Yi Jian, who didn't know how long it had been, suddenly felt that her body was wet. Only then did she wake up from her contemplation. When she looked up, she realized that there was a faint line of gray on the distant horizon. It was already 5 o'clock in the morning. Yi Qian, who had not slept the entire night, did not feel sleepy at all. She quickly washed her face and rinsed her mouth with the sound of the military horn at the recruit assembly camp. 2 minutes later, Yi Qian, who had packed up her textbooks, appeared in the canteen on time. Here, Yi Qian only needed to help the cooking squad wash the vegetables and clean up the place. A week's worth of breakfast and dinner would be ready. Yi Qian, who had been here for half a month, was nimble, diligent, and able to endure hardships. All the soldiers in the recruit assembly camp knew her. "Morning. Morning. You're up so early. Come on, the pickled vegetable buns just came out of the pot. There are also eggs and steamed buns. Whatever you want to eat, go get it yourself." The leader of the cooking squad was from the northeast. When he saw Yi Qian come in, he happily told her to eat more. The soldiers in the class all agreed that Yi Qian had lost a lot of weight and was much shorter. If he ate more noodles, he would grow taller and fatter. Yi Qian didn't know if it was because he had been eating well for the past half a month, but he really did feel that he had grown a lot taller. After greeting them with a smile, he ate his breakfast and cleaned up the kitchen. She tidied up the kitchen, tidied up the room, and left for school at 6:30. She liked to jog to school. While exercising, she could also strengthen her body. Gao Yang, who was riding his bicycle, once again saw the figure running along the national highway. After a slight hesitation on his cold and handsome face, the corners of his lips tightened a little, and he pedaled his bicycle to catch up. He rode directly in front of Yi Qian and slammed on the brakes. His hands gripped the steering wheel of the bicycle handsomely, and with a twist, he and the bicycle stopped in front of Yi Qian. This series of actions was completed very quickly. He didn't consider whether others would be frightened. He suddenly stopped in front of Yi Qian, who was jogging. Yi Qian's reaction was a little more valiant. In addition to what had happened last night, his subconscious reaction was. He lifted his leg and viciously kicked the bicycle in the middle. Gao Yang didn't expect to be met with a direct kick. He stared blankly as Yi Qian, who had a cold and ruthless expression, kicked out like lightning. She didn't hesitate at all and kicked directly. Clang! Bang! Gao Yang, who had been kicked down with his bicycle, didn't regain his senses for a while. Chapter 75. What am I doing? Yi Qian didn't look apologetic at all. He calmly retracted his left leg and smiled. I should be the one asking you what you're doing. If I didn't react quickly, I would be the one lying on the ground right now. Yi Qian didn't like anyone who had anything to do with Ying. Moreover, this Gao Yang, was a bit too full of himself. Gao Yang, who was in a sorry state, got up in a rage out of humiliation. As he patted the dust off his body, he faintly sucked in a breath of cold air. He rolled up his sleeves and saw that his elbow was scraped and bleeding. Seeing the wound, he angrily looked up and glared at Yi Qian. You're really, I'm really what? Yi Qian calmly interrupted him. You think I didn't kick you hard enough? The faint disgust in her tone caused Gao Yang's face to turn even more ashen and ugly. When his gaze met Yi Qian's ice-cold and emotionless black eyes, his heart turned slightly cold. However, he did not say anything else. His lips were pursed into a straight line. He lifted his bicycle and asked as if he was giving alms, where did Ying go during the May Day holiday? I went to your Shuka village, but I couldn't find her. What did Yi Qian hate the most? People like him the most. As if you should be grateful and honored that he was willing to talk to you. With a cold laugh, Yi Qian didn't look at him anymore and walked over. You're being unreasonable. Yi Qian, stop right there. Gao Yang wanted to ask her something, but when he saw her ignoring him, he suppressed his anger and pushed the bicycle with his left hand and reached out with his right hand to grab Yi Qian's arm. Yi Qian's cold expression had completely turned cold when he chased after him again. Seeing that he still dared to reach out to grab him, a cold glint flashed in his dark eyes. It seemed that he hadn't kicked him enough just now. He didn't learn his lesson. Her patience was running out. She narrowed her eyes and her face was cold. The moment she turned around, she grabbed Gao Yang's right hand with one hand and twisted it forcefully. This boy, who was considered the most handsome boy in school, was in so much pain that he cried out involuntarily. My patience has always been limited. You've done it again and again. Gao Yang, do you think I'm a pushover who can be easily bullied? He increased the strength of his hand, and the muscles in his arm could be seen twisting outwards. Gao Yang was already in so much pain that his back was drenched in cold sweat. However, his arrogance was not reduced in the slightest. He shouted coldly, let go of me. Yi Qian. Apologize. The corners of Yi Qian's lips curled up coldly. She grabbed his wrist with one hand and grabbed his shoulder with the other. Removing your arm is just a small matter to me. Her expression was exceptionally cold. Even her eyes seemed to have a metallic glint to them. Her calm tone made it clear that she wasn't joking. Gao Yang's heart froze. He immediately realized that every word she said was absolutely true. She wasn't joking. I apologize. With this realization, no matter how angry Gao Yang was, he could only apologize honestly. I'm very sorry. I offended you. Please forgive me. Yi Qian chuckled softly and slowly released his hands. She raised her eyebrows and the coldness in her expression disappeared. She said lazily, at least you know what's good for you. Let me remind you, Mr. Gao. In the future, you shouldn't ask me about Ying in front of me. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that I won't do anything to make you unhappy. Also, Ying and I don't walk the same path. I don't want to have anything to do with her. After she finished speaking, she picked up her backpack and leisurely jogged again as if nothing had happened. Chapter 76. Fujian town was surrounded by mountains. Although it was poor, the scenery was picturesque. Every morning, Yi Qian would jog along the national highway and look at the mountains and rivers. He always felt exceptionally calm. Even Gao Yang's incident did not affect his mood. Yi Qian's hair was wet from the fog. When he entered the classroom, he saw Liao Jian, who was always late, sitting in the classroom. He was not as noisy as he usually was. He was so quiet that he looked gloomy. When he heard the footsteps of a classmate coming in, his gloomy eyes faintly lit up as he looked up. When he saw that it was Yi Jian, that glimmer of light disappeared in an instant like sparks. He stood up and looked behind Yi Qian. Yi Qian immediately knew what he was doing. He was waiting for Ying to come over. His father was arrested, so he was afraid, uneasy, and anxious. It was normal for him to be anxious to find someone who could help him. Moreover, Yi Ying's father was the deputy mayor. It was normal for him to look for her. He was the one who was not normal. Since when was his relationship with Yi Ying so good that he could look for her? Yi Qian, here. I have good news for you. Yi Qian calmly looked away as his classmate waved at him. He walked over with a smile. What good news? Why are you so excited so early in the morning? The ones who arrived early were always the few who were good at studying. The top scorer in the liberal arts and science class were both present. The top scorer in the liberal arts, Zhang Na, did not wait for Yi Qian to sit down and said excitedly, the competition for the provincial experimental high school. Which subject did you sign up for? Mathematics. Language, physics, chemistry. Oh, and English. This is an extra point competition. All second and third graders in the province can participate. Next Saturday, the teachers will come to our school. We'll sign up later. The top science student, Zhou Liao, was also excited. He had an extraordinary passion for mathematics. This time, he signed up for the competition. Zhang Na glanced at him, then looked at Yi Qian. Her eyes twinkled. She smiled and said, Then Yi Qian, you're choosing physics? Chemistry. Anyway, you did pretty well in the physics exams these 2 times. Her words immediately put a lot of pressure on the male students who were interested in signing up for the chemistry Olympiad. Yi Qian's Chinese is pretty good too. In less than a month, Yi Qian had already made the top students in the class feel the pressure of competition. The top 3 in this competition would all get bonus points, which would be a great advantage for entering the provincial experimental No. 1 middle school. Yi Jian looked up from the competition registration list and said with a smile, Give me the pen. Yi Jian smiled and said, Give me the pen. He bent down and looked at the application column. A string of beautiful English words that could be used as advertisements appeared on the application form. When Zhang Na saw it, she said in shock, English. English. Would this work? We only learned English in the first year of junior high. Let's register for English first. There are instructions here that a candidate can register for multiple subjects at the same time. All the exams are not done in one go, but in batches. Yi Qian smiled and put down his pen. He looked calm and confident. You guys go first. I'll follow, she said with a smile. The meaning behind her words made the faces of the top students somewhat awkward. Zhou Liao frowned and looked at Zhang Na. He said in a deep voice, the exam is based on ability. Without Yi Qian, are you sure you can get into the top 3? He then looked at Yi Qian, who was backing down for his classmates, and said sternly, don't worry about anything. It's based on ability. Zhang Na was about to cry. Yi Qian patted her on the shoulder and smiled. Really, there aren't many people who want to register for English. Let's give it a try first. If it doesn't work, we'll take another test. Chapter 77. I'm not bad myself, so what's there to be afraid of? Yi Qian took his registration form and returned to his seat. He filled in all the subjects except Chinese. He could definitely participate in more of these competitions, especially since his goal was to get into the provincial experimental high school. There were still 10 minutes before the morning self-study session. Liao Jian, who had been fidgeting, suddenly stood up and rushed over, making the tables and chairs squeak. Ying appeared at the classroom door. If Liao Jian hadn't made the tables and chairs squeak, Yi Qian wouldn't have looked up from his politics textbook. The two met at the classroom door and saw a flash of panic in Yi Ying's eyes. She pursed her lips and said, "Go outside." She immediately turned and left the classroom, as if afraid that someone would see her. Yi Ying's expression was much easier to read compared to her previous life when she became a government official's wife. Yi Qian's lips were slightly pursed. In his previous life, he graduated from junior high school, but Yi Ying studied in America and became the pride of Fujian town. So much so that when he ran back to Fujian town, he had no choice but to leave and survive cautiously. The biggest turning point of his life had passed. Then, let's see who will be king in the future. Who will be the bandit? What are they doing sneaking around? Since when can a bad student and a good student walk together? And Jesin, who happened to bump into Zhang Bin, sat down on his seat and said in a low voice, I even saw Liao Jian grab Yi Ying's wrist. He seemed to be very excited. Yi Qian also felt that the two were sneaking around, but this wasn't what she was concerned about. Why do you care? Have you filled in the form? The Provincial Experimental High School has a competition for bonus points for the high school entrance exam. Hurry up and talk to Zhou Liao and the others. Yi Qian said without looking up from his book. He had flipped from the first page to the 11th page. And Jesin sat up for less than 2 minutes and had already flipped to another page. And Jesin looked at her as she casually flipped through a page. Her gaze swept from the top to the bottom. Occasionally, she paused for a moment before flipping the page again. And Jesin looked at her suspiciously. Are you killing time? Even if she were to read books and memorize books, she wouldn't be able to do that. She would only pause on a page for a few minutes. You shouldn't spend your time like this. Let's review. Yi Qian glanced at her with a smile. He didn't explain anything and only said, You finished memorizing everything. The last few chapters of the Constitution are a little difficult to memorize. If you haven't memorized them, I suggest you memorize them a few more times. Who knows, you might pass this time. And Jesin was a top student in mathematics, so she was not interested in liberal arts. Hearing this, he yawned and stood up lazily. No. Also, it's not a good thing for Ying to be close to Liao Jian. You should be careful. Ying had always targeted Yi Qian, and a few weeks ago, Yi Qian had even embarrassed the narrow-minded Liao Jian. Now that the two of them had walked to the side, it was better to be careful. I know, don't worry. Yi Qian smiled disapprovingly and ended the conversation when the self-study class bell rang. In the city detention center, Xia Jinyuan received the report from the police. His gaze fell on one of Liao Yud's statements. After a long pause, his handsome face darkened as he asked, "How true is it?" Chapter 78. Xia Jinyuan waved the statement in his hand and pursed his thin lips. His voice had already deepened. I need to make a copy of this statement. Don't inform the local police station about the missing pistol for now. Wait for my news. Liao Yud mentioned that the pistol was still with him when he went to the town hospital to look for Dr. Zhou. However, the pistol was accidentally dropped when he was at the Spring Sun Hotel. There was another important point, and Jiaxin bumped into him when she ran over. That night, Yi Qian was the one who used her ventriloquism to play the roles. In other words, she was the one who bumped into Liao Yud. This little girl. It seemed that he had to go back and look for her. The Municipal Public Security Bureau agreed to Xia Jinyuan's request, but he had to give a reply within 24 hours. After all, the loss of a pistol with 15 bullets was a big deal. After leaving the Public Security Bureau, Xia Jinyuan drove the military jeep back to Fujian town. At an intersection waiting for a red light, he inadvertently looked at the opposite side. Jun Yan, who had always been cold, smiled slightly, then turned around and parked the car on the opposite side of the road. Less than 10 minutes after getting out of the car, he walked out of the building with a bag and returned to Fujian town. At this moment, Yi Qian was standing in the teacher's office. Her gaze was cold as she looked at her homeroom teacher. After she said a bunch of nonsense, she smiled and said, "Teacher Ku, don't worry. Although I'm young, I know how to act according to my ability. Since I've applied, I'm confident that I'll pass. You're my teacher, shouldn't you have more confidence in me?" Teacher Ku snorted when she submitted the competition form from the provincial experimental high school. Faced with her calm reply, Teacher Ku, who was about to vomit blood, said coldly, "Physics, chemistry, mathematics, and English. Do you think you're a genius? Apply for everything. It's fine if you embarrass yourself in school, but don't embarrass yourself outside." To Teacher Ku, Yi Qian was like a fish bone stuck in her throat. She couldn't spit it out or swallow it down. She had to face it every day and felt terrible every day. "I'm the one losing face. What does it have to do with you?" Yi Qian spoke and smiled. Ming Yan's dimples were even calmer and gentlemanly than a teacher's. Her bright eyes were smiling as she gazed at her own teacher. Her attitude, which was neither servile nor overbearing, made the other teachers have a good impression of her. Yi Qian had originally thought that as long as he could get into the top 3 in one subject, the rest of the competition would just be for fun. Now that Teacher Ku was deliberately making things difficult for him, he smiled faintly and made up his mind. If he wanted to take the exam, he would do it to his heart's content. She really liked face-slapping now. Mr. Ku threw the registration form into the drawer and snorted with a straight face. "You've never listened to my advice. You're so arrogant that you're throwing your face outside. What else can I say?" Hearing what she said, they all laughed and said, "Teacher Ku, if there is such a student in my class who dares to rush forward, I will burn incense every day. You must be happy in your heart." That's right. It's a good thing that students are motivated. As teachers, we have to support them. If they really do well in the exam, won't they bring glory to you and the school? Her colleague's words made Teacher Ku feel even more bitter. If it were any other student, she would be happy. However, it couldn't be Yi Jian. Chapter 79. However, Yi Qian was not affected by her at all. He carried his backpack and walked out of the school gates leisurely. Just as he was about to jog back to the recruit camp like he always did, he heard the sound of a car horn. This was also the signal used by the soldiers when they were driving. Others did not know, but when she heard it again, she immediately looked over. "Get in." Xia Jinyuan stuck his head out of the car window and waved at Yi Qian, who had stopped in his tracks. "Why are you still standing there? I'll send you back." "Little girl, you even know about the automobile soldiers. Don't tell me you've learned all the ways to contact each other in the army." Yi Qian instinctively wanted to reject this elegant yet dangerous man, but when she saw his half-smile, as if he knew everything, she sighed softly and walked over with a natural expression. She opened the door to the front passenger seat and got into the car with a light step. When she smiled at him, her expression was open and honest. This made Xia Jinyuan laugh. "You really don't know, or are you pretending not to know? Or are you deliberately pretending not to know? This little girl is so calm. I don't believe that she doesn't know why I'm here. I don't know. Since Captain Xia specially came to look for me, it must be something important." Yi Qian curved his lips and revealed a faint smile. "If Captain Xia didn't tell me, then I really wouldn't know." His thin lips were originally just a faint smile, but this time, his smile deepened. His handsome face was as clear as the moon as he said lazily, "Student Yi Qian, your attitude is very bad. You're asking the obvious. I think that there are some things that only one needs to know. I don't need to guess what others think." Yi Qian smiled faintly. Even under the cold military aura, he was calm and composed. "If the enemy doesn't move, I won't move. Isn't this the law of war?" In just one night, this little girl had improved too quickly. She even knew how to talk to him about the law of war. Xia Jinyuan smiled and glanced at her as he drove. "Where did you put it? This thing is dangerous. Moreover, you are not qualified to control it now, and you do not have the qualifications to own it. Although your intentions are good, it's better to leave it to us for safekeeping. It's in the dormitory. I didn't bring it." Since he had already put it this way, there was no need for her to pretend to be deaf and mute. She generously admitted, "I didn't touch it. I kept it well and waited for you to come and get it." He was right. Without a proper identity, it would be futile even if he possessed her. Uncle Jen and Principal Chin had taught her well, but she was not someone who would willingly break the law. Moreover, she really didn't care about that gun. He returned to the dormitory and took out a pistol from the bottom of the shoe cabinet. He returned in less than 3 minutes. The car was parked outside. It turned out that Xia Jinyuan, who was sitting in the car, was talking to Principal Chin. Under the setting sun, the tall and handsome man smiled slightly. He nodded slightly to Principal Chin, who had said something, and said, "Then we'll be back tomorrow afternoon." Chapter 80. Go to the city to buy a few sets of test papers? If not tonight, come back tomorrow afternoon. That was making a mountain out of a molehill. Most importantly, she did not want to travel with Xia Jinyuan at all. She was rejecting him wholeheartedly. How could the perceptive Xia Jinyuan not notice? However, going to the city was unavoidable. He had to take her to the Public Security Bureau to identify her. Xiao raised his eyebrows slightly. The smile on his face was a little reckless. "I started driving when I was 11 years old. It's been 9 years since then. So, you can rest assured." When he spoke to Principal Chin, his carefree attitude disappeared and was replaced by a serious expression. "Uncle Chin, don't worry. I promise to send you back safely tomorrow afternoon." Yi Qian was still in a daze even after the car had driven dozens of kilometers. She sat there with a cold expression and did not even look at him. Xia Jinyuan was not angry. Instead, he glanced at her from time to time. Xia Jinyuan waited until the car drove out of the winding national highway in the mountains and got on the highway to the city. He then said slowly, "It seems that I have offended you again. Your little face is as tense as a bullet." "I'm not angry. I just don't want to talk to you." Yi Qian rubbed his eyebrows and leaned against the pillow. He said indifferently, "I gave you the gun. Why do you have to make me go to the city? Moreover, you didn't ask for my permission before this. So that was the reason." Xia Jinyuan smiled and apologized to her. "I did need to take you to the city. I'm really sorry for not telling you in advance. But, Captain Xia, I don't like someone making decisions for me when I don't know anything." Yi Qian interrupted him rudely. He turned his head and looked at him coldly. "I really don't like it." At this moment, Xia Jinyuan realized that he had stepped on this girl's minefield. The smile on Jun Yan's face faded slightly. When he spoke again, his clear voice was filled with absolute respect for Yi Qian. "I'm very sorry, Yi Qian. I only cared about considering things from my own perspective and did not consider your feelings. That's right, I can't look at this little girl as if she's a minor. I have to treat her as an adult. About the pistol, I still need you to go back to the Public Security Bureau with me. Don't worry, you won't be implicated. If the Public Security Bureau wants to know where the pistol went, they need a record. The Municipal Public Security Bureau only gave me 24 hours, so I have to take you back tonight," Xia Jinyuan said seriously, explaining the whole thing very thoroughly. And his apology and respect made Yi Qian understand his position. Although his expression was still cold, at least they could continue the conversation normally. "I also need to apologize. I should have handed it over in time." Yi Qian was not an unreasonable person. On the contrary, she had a very clear personality. Actually, when she heard that he had to go to the city, she had already guessed something. The coldness she displayed was only to let the other party know what her persistence and her principles were. Her predecessor had suffered a loss because of her lack of persistence, so she had been defeated her whole life. In this life, she had to let everyone who knew her know that she had her own persistence and principles. No one could change her. Chapter 81. They set off at 6 in the evening and didn't enter the city until 11 at night. Xia Jinyuan looked at the city's night sky. There were flashes of lightning in the clouds at the end of the sky. It seemed that there would be a heavy rainstorm in the sky. He didn't wake up Yi Qian, who had already slept for a few hours. He smiled and drove into the gas station. When the car stopped, Yi Qian woke up with a start. His eyes were clear and there was no hint of drowsiness in them. This was a sign of alertness. The moment he opened his eyes, his mind was absolutely awake. Looking at the flashing clouds in the sky, Yi Qian frowned and said, "There's going to be a storm. How long until we get to the police station?" "We'll be there in 20 minutes. The bathroom is in front and the convenience store is next door." After turning off the engine, Xia Jinyuan took out his wallet and handed it to Yi Qian. "We need something to fill our stomachs. The police station is famous for being stingy. We won't even get a meal when we get there." He was indeed hungry. Yi Qian took the black wallet that still had his body temperature and went to the convenience store. He bought 2 bottles of milk and 2 packets of wafers and walked out with the bags. In front of her, a man and a woman pushed the door open, talking and laughing. Yi Qian had already retreated to the side, but the man who was flirting with the woman did not avoid her at all. His shoulder directly bumped into Yi Qian. A faint smell of gunpowder wafted over. Yi Qian saw a small black handle in the man's flipped sports jacket. It was a Ruger KP-94 handgun made of stainless steel and fired 9x19mm bullets. Yi Qian could tell what kind of gun it was just by looking at the handle. The unique characteristic of the gun was that its parts, from the sleeve, barrel, handle, and socket holder, to the small parts inside, were all made of stainless steel. Illegal gun possession. Yi Qian couldn't help but take a second look. As soon as they walked out of the convenience store, a flash of lightning appeared in the sky, followed by a sudden clap of thunder. The power of nature instantly shook people's hearts. The torrential rain fell without warning. Paw paw, the sound of the rain hitting the ground could be heard. In the blink of an eye, the entire city was shrouded in a curtain of rain. When Yi Qian returned to the car, he whispered to Xia Jinyuan, who had gotten into the car after him, "I met a man and a woman in the convenience store just now. The man had a Ruger KP-94. I've memorized his appearance. Do you have a pen and paper? I can draw him for you to see." After a pause, he continued, "The man looks a little similar to Brother Fei. The only difference is that he's a little younger. The way he speaks doesn't sound like a Chinese. Instead, he sounds like he grew up overseas." Xia Jinyuan, who was about to start the car, took out a pen from his pocket. Then, he turned around and easily picked up the plastic bag on the back seat. He took out a book from the bag and flipped to the last page. He pointed at a blank page and said in a deep voice, "Draw it and show it to me." His slightly cold voice sounded even colder and fiercer in the sound of the rain. Brother Fei has always had contacts overseas, but they haven't been able to break through yet. Short hair, a scar on the left ear. Yi Qian took the pen and started drawing on the blank page. He first drew the characteristics, then the facial features. Next, he noted the height, approximate height, what kind of clothes they wore, what kind of shoes they wore, and even the color of their socks. In the convenience store, after the man with the strange accent asked some questions, he bought 2 packs of cigarettes and walked out with a sexy woman in his arms. He didn't immediately get into the car. Instead, he looked at the sudden torrential rain and a trace of malice flashed across his face. Chapter 82. The portrait of the man was finished. Xia Jinyuan glanced at it and his handsome face instantly turned as cold as a sword. He glanced at the empty gas station and pursed his lips as he said to Yi Qian, "We need to go on an adventure. Do you want to prepare yourself? Drive. Don't worry about me. I can still protect myself." Yi Qian closed the book and put it aside without even looking at what book it was. He picked up the second book. This time, he saw it clearly. It was a book about war and soldiers. Why would he read such an entry-level military book? As this thought flashed through his mind, he quickly started drawing the woman's facial features. The car had already driven into the heavy rain. In order to catch up with the imported car, the car sped up instantly. The momentum was so strong that Yi Jian's entire body fell in front of the windshield. However, the pen in her hand was steady. Not a single stroke was out of place. After the woman's portrait was finished, Xia Jinyuan removed a communication device from the roof of the car. He drove with one hand and pressed a special contact number. After the call is connected, get them to contact the city's transportation team. Have them monitor all electronic devices in the city. At a sharp turn, Xia Jinyuan handed the communication device with a flashing red light to Yi Qian. "Make it short. Just say what you want to say." A few seconds later, the flashing red light turned green and a capable voice answered. Yi Qian heard Xia Jinyuan say something like, "Q King." The voice of the person on the phone suddenly became very serious. "J7 Roger. Dongfeng North Road, BMW Ute 67689. 2 suspects have been found. Transportation Team Assistance. Target locked. A cold female voice replaced Xia Jinyuan's voice. The person on the other end of the communication device immediately knew that there was someone else in Q King's car. And it was a girl. Xia Jinyuan didn't pay attention to her. The car made 2 turns and caught up with the imported BMW, which was also speeding through the rain. The heavy rain obstructed the view and also increased the risk factor. If the car was too fast, it was very likely that it would slip and roll over. At this time, Yi Qian could only trust the driver. Yi Qian took the pistol out of the compartment and said to Xia Jinyuan, who was focused on driving, "There are no cars on the road. If we follow closely, there is a high chance that we will be discovered. It would be best if we could destroy the wheels." "How confident are you?" Obviously, he had listened to her suggestion, but he wasn't sure if she was confident or not. Yi Qian loaded the gun and raised it. He narrowed his eyes and took aim. His lips curled into a smile as he said, "The gun is a little old, but the accuracy is not bad. As for the confidence, even if it's not 100%, it's at least 99%. No, I need to be 100% confident." Xia Jinyuan said coldly and stepped on the accelerator again. The sound of the motor increased, and even the thunder in front of them did not slow down the speed of the car. Fortunately, it was a military jeep. Although it looked no different from an ordinary car, its performance was excellent. When they reached the next intersection, the imported BMW suddenly turned left and rushed onto another road. J7's voice came from the communication device. "The target car has been locked. It is now entering Princess Road. Q King, please note that there are factories under construction north of Princess Road. There are no surveillance devices at the moment." They needed to force the imported BMW onto another road. They definitely couldn't go north of Princess Road. Yi Qian looked at the road sign that flashed by. His delicate lips pursed and his eyes darkened. "It's too late. We have already entered Princess Road. The target has been discovered." Chapter 83. Whether or not they were discovered was secondary. The most important thing was that they had to apprehend the suspect in the car. Regardless of whether he was Fei Ji's overseas contact or not, he still had to be arrested for illegally carrying a gun. North of Princess Road was an area that had been redeveloped in the city over the past 2 years. It was also an electronic industrial zone. Not only were many buildings still under construction, but some residential areas were also under construction. The only fortunate thing was that there were few people and it was raining in the middle of the night, so the possibility of endangering the safety of the people was much lower. They didn't have a map, not even a planning map, so it would undoubtedly affect the arrest. Xia Jinyuan wasn't very familiar with the traffic in the city and relied on the help of the traffic brigade. Yi Qian didn't pay attention to the road ahead. Instead, she stared at the road signs on both sides of the road. The speed of the car and the torrential rain didn't affect her. In the blink of an eye, she had already accurately reported the road sign that she had just seen clearly. Princess Road North Avenue, Huanzhong intersection. The road sign standing in the heavy rain was at least 500 meters away from them. In the blink of an eye, Yi Qian accurately reported the location. 5 kilometers, Chu Yuan intersection. Right, Chuli Road is Broken Head Road. Both sides are flattened bases. As J7's report came through the communication device, Xia Jinyuan, who was tailing the suspect's car, accelerated to 250 kilometers per hour. The entire car was like an arrow released from a bow, rushing out in the rain with a fierce momentum. Yi Qian, who was still fearless, gripped the communication device tightly. Her clear and childish voice contained a calmness that shouldn't be present at 14 years old. She said calmly, please dictate all the traffic plans north of Princess Road. Xia Jinyuan glanced at her from the corner of his eye. This girl wants to draw a map in her mind. If it were someone else, Xia Jinyuan would definitely smile faintly and not take it to heart. But for Yi Jian, even though she was only 14 years old, her calm demeanor that was as deep as water and as clear as water made people think that there was nothing that could stop her. This girl had a coldness that surpassed her peers. She wasn't impulsive, only calm and indifferent. Her splendor that was like water and mountain was already eye-catching enough to make people look up to her. As J7 spoke, Yi Qian's brain worked like a high-speed computer. What she needed, as well as what Xia Jinyuan needed, appeared in her mind, a map. The speed of the BMW is 256, the distance is 800 meters. Increase the speed to 280. We can catch up in 2 minutes. Not only did a map appear in his mind, but he also calculated accurately in his mind and reported a set of data. In 5 minutes, speed 280 km per hour and force the other party into Tsuli Road. What did Yi Qian do the most in his previous life? He was running away. The only way to escape safely was to memorize every street in every place. How could carrying a computer be more convenient than carrying one's own brain? She had to familiarize herself with the streets, exits, and small paths once she was in a place. Her many years of habit had finally become the capital she relied on to survive. It had also become an ability that ordinary people could not compare to. Xia Jinyuan's immature voice was firm and confident. Xia Jinyuan's choice was to trust him. Remember, Yi Qian. I need you to be 100% sure. Xia Jinyuan reiterated again and began to increase the speed of the car. Chapter 84. The maximum speed of the modified military jeep was 290 km per hour. If it reached 280 km per hour, the slightest problem at the front would cause the entire car to overturn. The corners of Yi Jian's lips curled up slightly as she said indifferently, 100% confident. If you believe in it, then I believe in it. Her indifferent voice was still calm, and even a little indifferent and lazy. She was really not afraid. Facing the possibility of death, she would face it calmly. Xia Jinyuan's lips curled up, and his dark eyes were full of admiration for her. This little girl is really not bad. Old Master Zhen and Uncle Chen had put in so much effort to cultivate her. Their foresight was indeed unique. A piece of unpolished jade had already been polished to the luster that a piece of fine jade should have. There was no need to doubt whether this little girl could make a name for herself. He absolutely believed that she would succeed in the future. 256 km per hour, 260 km per hour, 270 km per hour. Yi Qian stared at the changing speed on the dashboard and tacitly agreed that it had reached 60 seconds. Under Xia Jinyuan's calm gaze, the distance between the car and the speeding BMW narrowed. In the BMW, the sexy girl turned her head to look at the jeep that was about to run parallel to them. There was no fear on her beautiful face. Instead, she giggled and said to the man driving, "Jason, they've caught up. It looks like they won't let go." I couldn't ask for more. The man laughed out loud, and his cold face was filled with madness. They actually lost so many people in such a small place. If I don't teach them a lesson, how can I quench my anger? The girl's laughter grew louder. Her hand with bright red nail polish gently stroked Jason's thin face. There was a trace of coldness in her beautiful eyes, like that of a venomous snake. Jason quickly glanced to his left, gritted his teeth, and cursed, "Damn it." Without slowing down, he made a sharp right turn and rushed into Chu Yuan Road. The tires screeched against the ground, and water splashed everywhere. Under the high pressure, the water was compressed into mist, instantly blurring the line of sight of the cars behind. The two cars sped up to the highest speed on the empty road. They were both ruthless and willing to risk their lives. Yi Qian loosened the safety buckle on the front passenger seat and bent over to the back seat. She looked like a soldier who had calmly walked onto the battlefield. She was counting softly with a cold expression on her face. 1, 2, 3. The car window was lowered, and the rain poured into the car. In a second, Yi Qian's face and hair were all wet. With a cold expression, she stuck a loaded pistol out of the car window. At the same time, Xia Jinyuan accelerated to 290 km per hour and rushed in from the right side of the BMW. This was the second time the two of them had worked together. With the prior communication and the trust they had built, the tacit understanding throughout the entire process was as natural as flowing clouds and flowing water. Yi Qian aimed at the BMW's rear wheel. Her dark eyes were filled with cold tears. The speed of the car, the impact of the wind, the impact of the drag. The string of numbers flashed through her mind like jumping cymbals. Then, she fired without hesitation. Compared to the sound of thunder and torrential rain, the sound of gunfire seemed insignificant. After a bang, sparks flew everywhere. The BMW, whose tires had been shot, lost control and flipped to one side. It made an ear-piercing sound of metal rubbing against each other as it spun toward the construction site on the right side of Chuyuan Road. Chapter 85. Jason and the beautiful woman in the car had never imagined that they would be forced to stop in such a way. After the car flipped over, it spun like a top and rushed to the side of the road. At this time, the high-performance car reflected the value of the price. The airbags popped out and surrounded the two people. Even if the sky and earth were turned upside down, at least their brains were not damaged. Moreover, the car was going straight towards the foundation of the car. In the heavy rain, the foundation of the soil had become exceptionally soft, which obstructed the strong spinning force and protected the people in the car. The reason Yi Qian climbed to the back was because the two of them agreed that when the right side of the car was hit, the driver would quickly do something that would benefit him if there was no way to turn the steering wheel towards his left side. Reality proved that this was indeed the case. Behind the car was a scene of sparks flying everywhere, but inside the car. Yi Qian closed the car window again, put away his pistol, and wiped the rain off his face. Qin Yan's face lit up with a faint smile. Done, I'm 100% sure. She wouldn't gamble on anything that wasn't 100% certain. Gambling was something that needed to be judged according to the situation. Why should she gamble on something like this, which was completely dependent on her ability? Xia Jinyuan, who had already stepped on the brakes, turned the car around and returned to the scene after the car had traveled 200 meters due to inertia. Hearing this, she raised her clear voice and said happily, "Well done." It was so beautiful that it was impeccable. The car stopped in the heavy rain. Xia Jinyuan didn't immediately get out of the car to check. Instead, he said to Yi Qian, "With your ability to adapt, it shouldn't be too difficult for you to drive." If anything happened, she could still drive away immediately. As a soldier, Xia Jinyuan was used to arranging an escape route. As Yi Qian raised his eyebrows slightly, he had already started explaining how to start the car and how to drive. Refuel, brake, one to go, the other to stop. You can control the steering wheel yourself. Turn left, turn right. Listening to his explanation, Yi Qian sighed softly in her heart. She thought to herself, this is probably the most irresponsible driving instructor in the world. It's obvious that he's leaving the students to fend for themselves. You mean, you get out of the car, and I'll watch from the parking lot? Yi Qian sat there patiently while looking out the window. However, he didn't intend to let him go. He looked at him with a faint smile and said, "I don't think this behavior is out of responsibility for my safety. Captain Xia, we have fought together twice. We can't be considered comrades, but we can still be considered partners." Yi Qian did not say anything else. He believed that with his intelligence, he would definitely understand what he was trying to say. How could he not understand? He had experienced how poisonous the little girl's mouth was. However, when it came to such matters, Xia Jinyuan kept the faint smile at the corner of his lips and spoke in a cold tone as if he was speaking to his own soldiers. "Yi Qian, I order you to stay put and wait for further orders. Apart from being a business partner, you are also a student. Even though I have seen your ability and strength, I am a soldier. You are a soldier, and you are a student. Soldiers protect the country, and the meaning of home is you. Your family, your friends. You. This is my duty, and it is also our principle as a soldier." Chapter 86. What was a soldier? Soldiers were the cornerstone of a country. They were born in peace, but they could die in war. When the horn was blown and the war song was played, they, who guarded the country, would definitely be at the forefront. Soldiers were the most intimidating and lethal people in a country. They were worthy of dying for the sake of war. Even if they died for the people, their souls would still be there. Yi Qian looked at Xia Jinyuan, whose gaze was cold and hard, but who used his life to explain what a soldier was. The faint smile on her face gradually disappeared. It was no longer casual, but filled with respect. He nodded his head lightly and only said one word, "Okay." It was a promise and also a guarantee. "Good girl." Xia Jinyuan stretched out his hand and smiled. "Stay here. I'll be back soon. Also, call the ambulance." After he finished speaking, he opened the car door, got out of the car with a cold gaze, and walked into the torrential rain. His tall and slender figure was as imposing as a mountain. With the indomitable spirit of a soldier, he walked toward the overturned BMW. Yi Qian quietly looked at the back view that was as majestic as a mountain. She hummed softly, "You won't know me in the age of white pigeons flying. My name isn't as prominent as the stars. In the days when the smoke of war is gone, you won't pay attention to me. My story will be drowned out by the song." In the most dangerous times, there was always a group of people who rushed to the front and shielded you from the wind and rain. Major Xia Jinyuan, who had rushed into the rain, was one of the members of that group. After dialing 120 for the ambulance, Yi Qian, who stayed in the car, felt that time was passing very slowly. He was suffering. He quietly looked outside and watched Xia Jinyuan, who was bending over to check the situation inside the car with a flashlight. The rain had already soaked him, but it didn't affect his cautious actions. After checking, he climbed to the car door that was facing the sky. After a while, Yi Qian saw him open the door. Seeing this, Yi Qian was already frightened. He knew that Xia Jinyuan would definitely check carefully before opening the door, but he still couldn't help but worry. Without hesitation, he opened the car door and rushed out in the heavy rain. She just walked over and stood behind the car. She raised her head and didn't even blink when the rain poured into her eyes. Her dark eyes looked at the man standing on top of the platform, who was as imposing as a god. She said softly, "The relationship between the people and the people is as thick as water. Comrade soldier, occasionally, as civilians, we can also be your backing. Isn't that right?" At the very least, she would stand here and watch for him. Once there was danger, he would rush forward without hesitation. Protecting us is your unshirkable responsibility. Then, please allow me to contribute my meager strength to you. The girl's voice was not loud. It was clearly as light as dripping water, but it carried a power that could penetrate stone, allowing him to clearly hear every word she said. Those clear and calm eyes quietly looked at him. In her eyes, he had already seen the most beautiful scenery in the world. His thin lips slightly raised, Xia Jinyuan smiled and said, "You're a very stubborn partner. I really have no reason to reject you." The first person to be dragged out was the beautiful woman who had fainted. In her hand, she was holding a delicate and small pistol, which was obviously specially made in the military factory. The gun was confiscated, the bullets were removed, and the person was dragged to the side. Yi Qian, who was standing in front of the car, shone his flashlight so that Xia Jinyuan, who had already entered the car, could easily drag out the other suspect. Seeing that the unconscious man was about to be dragged out, Yi Qian suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. Chapter 87. Seeing that the unconscious man was about to be dragged out, Yi Qian suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. Inside the car, Xia Jinyuan shouted in a deep voice, "Get out of the way." Yi Qian, who had sensed the impending danger, arched her body and leaped forward like a nimble cat when she heard his shout. The glamorous woman, who had thought that it would be easy to sneak up on a little girl, was visibly surprised. She let out a soft, without pausing, she raised her leg and kicked Yi Qian again. In the thick yellow mud, Yi Qian nimbly flipped over twice in a row and was already squatting on the ground. Like a cheetah, she looked coldly at the beautiful woman who had ambushed her twice in a row. He shone the flashlight directly at the woman's face and turned on the strong light mode. In the blink of an eye, Yi Jinting jumped up with a cold look in his eyes. He attacked the beautiful woman who was holding an extremely thin silver wire in her hand. Inside the car, Xia Jinyuan, who had just heaved a sigh of relief, saw that Yi Qian had actually taken the initiative to attack. His heartstrings tightened again. He didn't know if she could handle the suspect. He was still dragging the other suspect, so he let go without hesitation. He bent his body and retreated outside, intending to help Yi Qian. It turned out that the unconscious Jason had opened his eyes groggily after being dragged, pulled, and let go. They weren't injured, but they had fainted due to the lack of oxygen in the high-speed rotation. Now that he had woken up, his first instinct was to pull out his gun and shoot at the side of the car door. Xia Jinyuan saw Yi Qian fighting outside. Seeing that she was fierce, he relaxed slightly and punched the man who was still trying to pull out his gun. His fist landed on the man's nose, easily causing him to bleed. The car flipped sideways. The fight between the two adult men in the car caused the whole car to shake. With a bang, the car fell and flipped back. The tremor made Yi Jian feel as if the entire ground was trembling. She didn't look back, but focused on dealing with the glamorous woman who was holding an extremely tough silver wire. In the army, she had fought with soldiers before, but this was the first time she had fought with criminals. She wasn't afraid, only slightly excited. The restless fighting spirit in her body became restless, and it struggled even more with Yi Qian's punches. Standing in the rainy night, Yi Qian, who hadn't even had her period, was no different from a child in the eyes of the other party. There was no need to be afraid of her. The glamorous woman flipped the wet hair on her forehead and smiled coquettishly. "Little girl, why aren't you properly in school? Why are you joining the fight with a soldier? I'm not your teacher. Little girl, you're really unlucky to have met me." As she spoke, she narrowed her eyes slightly, and a trace of coldness flowed out from the corners of her eyes. The silver wire in her hand, which was made of a special material and was usually used as a hairband, was gently pulled between her two hands. Yi Qian seemed to hear the zhing-zhing sound of the silver wire. The corners of Yi Qian's mouth curled up slightly. Although he was small, his aura was not small. He smiled coldly and said, "Sister, you're old, and I happen to be the kind of person who doesn't want to respect old people. So, you're really unlucky to have met me. Chapter 88. It was raining heavily, and under the dim yellow light of the street lamps, the woman in front of him still had to tidy up her messy hair from time to time. It was obvious that she paid a lot of attention to her image. Usually, people like her had a common problem: they were only allowed to call her young, but not old. Calling her old was like stepping on a landmine, it would explode with one step. As expected, the woman's expression immediately twisted when she heard that. Her delicate makeup was washed away by the rain, and her expression was so twisted. Ah, she really wasn't a young woman. Little girl, you're asking for it. The woman took a step forward with her long legs, pulled the silver wire in her hand, and wrapped it around Yi Qian's neck. She wanted to use the shortest time possible to get rid of this silly little girl who mocked her for being old. This was a woman who was used to killing people and had no sense of guilt. Her indifference to human life could be seen from her twisted expression. Little did she know that this silly little girl was a thorn that couldn't be touched. Yi Qian calmed down slightly. His gaze swept past the silver wire in the woman's hand that could be wrapped around his neck at any time. The moment she rushed over, he kicked the woman's thigh fiercely. Then, using her big foot as a support point, she stepped on the other party's leg and soared into the air. Using her right knee, she fiercely hit the girl's chin with a majestic force. His agile body spun like a swallow, then landed nimbly on the ground. The moment he appeared, he dealt a heavy blow to his opponent. If Xia Jinyuan didn't want to capture Jason alive, he would have clapped his hands and cheered. The beautiful woman was hit by Yi Qian on the spot. Her chin hurt as if her bones were fractured, and she saw stars in front of her eyes. Damn it! I'm going to kill you today. Knowing that she had underestimated her opponent, the woman covered her chin and spat out a mouthful of bloody phlegm. She looked at Yi Qian warily and took off her tight denim jacket. Yi Qian was someone who wasn't afraid of threats. He wasn't afraid in his previous life, and he definitely wouldn't be afraid in this life. Hearing this, her delicate lips curved slightly. I don't think there's a chance that you can kill me. If you don't believe me, you can try. He purposely added a hint of provocation in his words. His gaze was locked on the silver wire in the other party's hand that occasionally flashed with a cold light under the street lamp. Her gaze was heavy and cold, and the rain-stained face of Ming Yan contained a ruthlessness that did not match her age. When the girl, who was originally extremely confident, met her gaze, it made her heart tremble for no reason. If we can win, then we don't have to give them a chance to rebuild their confidence. While Uncle Jen's words echoed in his mind, Yi Qian, who had seen clearly and remembered how his opponent nimbly pulled the silver thread in his hand, was like a cheetah in its first battle. It flashed its sharp claws and attacked again. Although it was his first battle, he had trained with the elite soldiers in the army. Perhaps it was because she had been tainted with the ruthlessness of a soldier in battle, but her clear eyes were also filled with ruthlessness. The best defense was an offense. If she was confident that she could win, then she had to win beautifully. Next to them, Xia Jinyuan, who had just finished the fight, knocked out the suspect and tied him up with clothes. Then, he looked at the ruthless girl with interest. She was like a little cheetah, beating her enemy until he was in a sorry state. The beautiful woman had gone from her initial arrogance to fighting back in a sorry state. The thin silver wire in her hand had always been her life-saving and killing weapon, but this time, it was useless. There were a few times when she almost injured her hands. Chapter 89. The girl's punching routine was Sanda, which was integrated into the Japanese Taekwondo routine. Therefore, she used more kicks than punches. Even Yi Qian couldn't bear to end such a rare battle. Grandpa Jen once said that theory and actual combat were indispensable. Sometimes, a powerful battle was better than understanding countless theory books. Xia Jinyuan could tell that she had intentionally prolonged the battle at the end so that she could use all the techniques she had learned on her opponent. A smart girl always had a smart way of doing things. That student over there, don't treat people like cats. Don't forget, we still have serious business to attend to. He laughed and raised his voice. He also wanted her to have more actual combat experience, but time was a little tight. He still had to send her back to school tomorrow. The girl was still growing. If she got wet, she might get sick. One was fighting with ease, while the other was watching from the sidelines. The girl, who was already at a disadvantage, became even more flustered. Faced with this little girl who was clearly still a child, but had such a ruthless gaze, she couldn't help but feel a trace of uncertainty when she kicked. Her long leg swept over again. It looked like she had already dodged Yi Qian. Ming Yan's face lifted slightly, but there was a sinister smile. She said to the girl, "Sorry, your leg is quite powerful. I'm sure you can escape quickly." She smiled slightly, but her words were filled with bloodthirst. "So, I have to destroy it." Her smile faintly contained a hint of bloodthirst. The girl, whose heart couldn't help but tremble, sensed the approaching danger. In her panic, she actually tried to retract her long leg. How could she possibly give her the chance to escape? Yi Qian's dark eyes were cold. He moved as fast as lightning, his right hand grabbing the girl's ankle. Amidst the girl's scream, Yi Qian's left hand formed into a palm. Holding rainwater, he viciously and fiercely struck her knee. As a person who had experienced life and death, Yi Qian, who had seen through life and death, couldn't possibly have the heart of a saint, no matter how young his body was. Or rather, it was laughably compassionate. In front of her was a criminal who was indifferent to human life and said that he wanted to kill. How could she show mercy to a criminal? Amidst the girl's shrill screams, Yi Jian, with a cold expression, grabbed both of her hands and clasped them behind her back. She then picked up the denim shirt that the girl had thrown aside and tied it up beautifully. "Little girl, you've learned quite a lot. Come, tell me, is there anything you don't know?" Xia Jinyuan looked at Yi Qian, who even tied a knot like a professional. While admiring him, he also thought, his talent is amazing. In less than a month's time, he had undergone an astonishing transformation, as if he had been reborn. With a smile, Yi Qian let go of the girl who was still screaming in pain. She clapped her hands and said indifferently, "There's one more thing." She paused intentionally, and there was a hint of ruthlessness in her smile. "I don't know how to kill." The smile on Xia Jinyuan's thin lips faded slightly. Then, with a hint of heaviness in his voice, he sighed softly and said, "If possible, no one wants to learn how to kill. Little girl, you. But as long as I walk down the path that Captain Xia once walked, I think, learning how to kill is only a matter of time." Compared to the heaviness in his voice, Yi Qian was clearly much more relaxed. Chapter 90. The reason why she was so relaxed was because she had come to terms with her past and knew what her goal was. Yi Qian looked up and smiled. "What's there to be afraid of, even if my hands are stained red with blood, if I kill to protect the peace of the country?" Principal Chen and Master Zhen had always taught her that, in order to protect the peace of the country, and to protect the dignity of the country, even if her hands were stained with blood and she became the target of the enemy, what was there to be afraid of? Xia Jinyuan, who did not speak immediately, patted her shoulder gently. He stared at her with his deep dark eyes and said word by word, "Student Yi, remember what you said tonight. When you have a legal gun license, I look forward to fighting alongside you again." Because he said that she did not have a legal gun license, she did not shoot the suspect in the dangerous fight just now, even though she had the opportunity to shoot him dead. From this, he could tell that this was a girl who could restrain herself and had light in her heart. He was worried that the murderous intent in her heart was too strong, but after hearing her words, he immediately felt relieved. I'll get the police car and ambulance to stop at the intersection. Get in the car first, I'll take care of things here. Xia Jinyuan looked at Yi Qian worriedly. Not only was he soaked, but he was also covered in mud. His dark eyes flickered. Don't go to the Public Security Bureau for now. Go to the reception center to wash up first. Yi Qian raised his arm and looked down at himself. He smiled and said, the first time I met Principal Qin, I stood in the rain for almost an hour during the first class. In other words, this was not a big deal. She was not as delicate as the girls in the capital, nor as arrogant as the girls in the city. Instead, she had the pride to endure hardships, a beautiful heart, and a pair of bright eyes that could see through the vanity of the world. It was a pleasure to talk to such a girl. Sitting in the car, Yi Qian looked at Xia Jinyuan, who was still standing in the rain and talking to the soldiers. His majestic back subconsciously fell into her heart. Although she did not want to interact with such a dangerous and charismatic man, she had to admit that he was a very outstanding soldier. When they arrived at the reception center, Xia Jinyuan directly took a set of short sleeves and shorts for female soldiers from the front desk and handed them to Yi Qian along with the room card. Room 306. I'm 307. If you need anything, feel free to contact me. The two of them were only separated by a wall. Yi Qian entered the shower and stood under the shower head. She closed her eyes and looked up. Immediately, there was muddy yellow water under her feet. After showering for at least half an hour, Yi Qian walked out of the shower. Xia Jinyuan. Xia Jinyuan. Yi Qian, whose hair had not even dried, immediately opened the door. Aren't you going to rest? I'm here to give you this. He raised his hand and a pair of white sneakers fell into Yi Qian's eyes. You definitely can't wear your shoes tomorrow. I just bought them. See if they fit. Not only did he have shoes, he even prepared socks. Xia Jinyuan did not know if they fit. He lowered his gaze and looked at Yi Qian's feet. After a glance, his Adam's apple moved slightly. He immediately looked up and quickly stuffed the shoes and socks into Yi Qian's hands. This little girl's feet are really beautiful. Her skin was so fair that it was like a pink pearl. Stop, what are you thinking? Chapter 91. Major Xia, who had always kept a low profile, quickly hid the slight awkwardness in his eyes. There was no trace of abnormality on his elegant face. Go back to the room and try it on. If you want to change, there's still time. He lowered his gaze slightly again, but he didn't dare to look directly at Yi Qian's beautiful bare feet. Instead, he looked at her fair and slender calf. His thin lips were already pursed tightly. Her skin was extremely fair and had a milky, porcelain-like luster. It was so delicate that it seemed as though a slight pressure could leave a scar on it. But now, there was a slight flaw in her fair skin. A bruise that was already purplish-black had appeared very conspicuously on her right calf. Xia Jinyuan glanced at it. His gaze froze, and he suddenly bent down. Don't move. As Yi Qian stepped back, he said coldly, let me check if there's any bone damage. Not only was the bruise dark, but it was also very large. He didn't know how this little girl could endure it. His sudden action really stunned Yi Qian. She instinctively took a step back, but in the end, his large hand grabbed her ankle and even ordered her not to move. Although she was only 14 in this lifetime, but in her previous lifetime, she was at least 28. Yi Qian, who had never been in a relationship before and had her first kiss in both lifetimes, was stunned. She had never been held by a man before. Now that Major Xiao's large hand had suddenly grabbed her ankle, even though Yi Qian, who had seen through life and death and was indifferent by nature, had a visible flush on her face. She had just taken a hot shower, so her skin was as white and delicate as a peeled egg. That gorgeous flush was like a blooming flower. It was so beautiful that it could take one's breath away. Fortunately, Major Xiao's attention was focused on her injury, and he didn't notice anything else. The hand that held Yi Qian's ankle had slender fingers and his palm was burning hot. The skin that he was holding seemed to have a higher temperature, so hot that it made Yi Qian want to run away. No. Yi Qian finally calmed himself down, but he was once again stunned by his next action. He actually knelt down on one knee, his expression focused and serious as he checked his injured calf. Yi Qian's slender, jade-like fingers gently pressed on the wound, starting from the outside, then moving to the middle. Yi Qian was so embarrassed that his whole body was tense. Xia Jinyuan was holding her ankle, so he knew her body's reaction very well. He knelt on one knee and checked her body. Amused, he said, "You're just a child. Why are you so nervous?" "I'm just checking for you." It would have been better if she hadn't said anything. The moment she did, Yi Qian felt his face burn even more. "There's absolutely no way to do so, can you just ignore it?" This was the first time a man had held her ankle. She, who had never felt awkward before, really wanted to run away. "If you back off again, I don't mind carrying you to the bed to check." Xia Jinyuan looked up and glanced at her with a smile. A sentence that could cause misunderstandings slowly came out of his thin lips. "Yi Qian. Major Xia, how could you say something like that in front of an adult like me? Are you trying to take liberties with me? Do you understand?" Major Xia didn't understand. At the age of 14, it was as though her soul had been blessed. In 2 years, she had skipped grades from middle school to high school. At the age of 16, she had gotten into the best military school with excellent grades and a grand slam in physical fitness. From then on, she had mingled with men. Throughout the year, she had seen more sows than women. Chapter 92. Major Xia didn't understand. At the age of 14, it was like a blessing to her soul. In 2 years, she had skipped all the grades from junior high to senior high school. At the age of 16, she had gotten into the best military school with excellent results and a grand slam in physical fitness. From then on, she had mingled with men. Throughout the year, she had seen more sows than women. He said it jokingly without a trace of disrespect. It was as if he was casually facing Yi Qian. Yi Qian sighed softly in his heart. Dangerous men really should be kept away from. If he wasn't careful, he would be taken advantage of. She lowered her head and looked down as if she was looking down at him. She could see his clear forehead, and his thick eyelashes that were even thicker than a woman's, and, under his elegant and tall nose, his thin lips that were sometimes sexy and sometimes fierce. When he spoke, his exquisite and elegant features were accompanied by a faint smile. He was so leisurely that it made people reluctant to end the conversation with him. When he held the gun, his gaze was sharp like a sword that could cut through the darkness. His enemies feared him. But as his comrades, they felt safe and trusted him wholeheartedly. After sizing him up for a while, Yi Qian quietly looked away. Dangerous men must not be looked at for too long. The longer he looked at him, the more he felt that he was a rare commodity. He would admire him more and more. "Girl, even if you can tolerate it, you shouldn't tolerate it like this." Xia Jinyuan was pressing his fingers around the bruise. He was already pursing his lips. One look and it was obvious that he was in a bad mood. A large area of soft tissue contusions, and the bleeding under the skin is spreading. Don't you feel pain? You've been tolerating it until now. Whether it was his expression or his words, they all expressed his cold displeasure. The middle part is purplish black and swollen. He pressed his thumb gently and immediately heard Yi Qian's soft gasp from above. He looked up and stared at her with his deep dark eyes. Go to the hospital for an X-ray. Be careful of fractures. Fractures? It wasn't that serious. No need, I know. Yi Qian politely refused with a smile. There are no fractures, but it does hurt a little. Okay, Major Xiao's gaze was so cold that it could scratch her skin. She completely refused. Don't think about sleeping tonight. She, who had always known how to survive, immediately softened. She didn't want to be forceful and used a different method to reject him. Indeed, if Yi Qian insisted that he was fine, Xia Jinyuan would have carried him to the hospital without another word. Getting up, Jun Yan was still serious as he looked at the little girl who was so strong that it made people's heart ache. After a long time, he smiled and said, "Go back to the room and wait for me. I'll get the medicinal oil for you to rub." She didn't have parents who could shelter her from the wind and rain. She had to deal with everything by herself. That was probably why she was so strong. Perhaps it was because of the intense fight in the rainy night, but Yi Qian's cerebral cortex was still excited even after he finished applying the medicinal oil. Lying on the bed, Yi Qian closed his eyes and the scene of him fighting with the girl appeared in his mind. That silver thread was indeed a very good weapon for self-defense, but he didn't know where to get one. As he thought about it, he gradually fell asleep. At 7:30 in the morning, they finished their morning run and had breakfast together before driving to the Municipal Public Security Bureau. The car that was dirty last night had been cleaned and there was still a faint mint smell in it. It was Xia Jinyuan's mint smell. When we get there, you just have to say that you found it. You don't have to say anything else. I'll wait for you outside. Xia Jinyuan didn't forget to remind her again, but he wasn't worried that she would be afraid of anything. This little girl was very brave. Chapter 93. Xia Jinyuan looked at the carefree Yi Jian with a faint smile. She did not have any psychological burden at all. She did not have any psychological burden at all. Indeed, she did not have any psychological burden at all. She did not do anything bad, so why should she be afraid? Before entering the interrogation room, Yi Qian smiled at him and entered the interrogation room with a policewoman and a policewoman. Xia Jinyuan stood outside for about 3 minutes before heading to the bureau chief's office. The bureau chief warmly welcomed Xia Jinyuan and said, "Young Master Xia, please take a seat." His tone was familiar, and it was obvious that they had known each other for many years. After personally making him a cup of tea, Chief Lu sat down and said, "Leader Xia personally called last night. I happened to mention that I saw young Master Xia at the bureau yesterday." Leader Xia smiled and asked young Master Xia to call him when you have time. The Bureau of Public Security was under the jurisdiction of the Provincial Public Security Bureau, and the Provincial Public Security Bureau was under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Public Security. "Sorry to trouble you, Chief Lu." Xia Jinyuan took the tea that the director personally handed to him. He was born with dignity. Facing the director of the Municipal Public Security Bureau, he was still calm. He took a sip of tea and looked up at Chief Lu's smile. He smiled and said, "There is one thing that I need you to do." He did not say, "please," or "trouble." His need was enough to express his attitude. He had to do it. When Chief Lu heard this, the smile on his face deepened. "Young Master Xia, you are too polite. Ha ha ha, young Master Xia has been here for half a year, but this is the first time you need me to do something. Everyone knew that young Master Xia, who was in the military, was the most difficult person in the capital to do favors with. Ever since young Master Xia came to them, many people had been hoping that one day, young Master Xia would open his mouth and ask for something. Who would have thought that after half a year of silence, such a great opportunity would fall into his lap? After Xia Jinyuan finished speaking, Chief Lu laughed heartily. So that's what you want? No problem at all. I will go get it later. Young Master Xia, please prepare it for me. Okay, thank you, Chief Lu. Xia Jinyuan, who didn't like to be courteous, stood up when he saw that the matter was settled. I have to go and see that girl. She's still a middle school student and is timid. I'm going to give her some courage. He stood up, and Chief Lu naturally had to send him off. However, Xia Jinyuan waved his hand, indicating that he would not allow others to refuse. But Jun Yen still smiled elegantly and said, I still know the way in the bureau. Director Lu, please continue with your work. He had never been a person who liked to be courteous. Director Lu had only come to find him after investigating. Otherwise, he would never have come if there was even the slightest problem. Calm. Calm. In less than 5 minutes, Director Lu had settled the matter. He did not let him send the girl off just now because he wanted him to deal with it as soon as possible, so that he could make it in time to give the girl a surprise. Thank you for your hard work. I am very sorry. I did not think that something I did would cause trouble for you. Yi Qian was a sincere person. Whether it was her words or her expression, they could feel her sincerity. In this aspect, she was very similar to Xia Jinyuan. After saying goodbye to the police, Yi Qian saw Xia Jinyuan, who was standing at the end of the corridor with a cold and arrogant aura. He quickened his pace and walked over. Chapter 94. Xia Jinyuan smiled as he looked at the girl walking towards him. His deep and dark eyes were filled with gentleness. Let's make a trip to the library. We should be back in town before 10. Seeing how she was still chatting and laughing as she said goodbye to the 2 police officers, he knew that this bold girl was not afraid at all. She did not panic like a commoner, nor did she break out in a cold sweat. Yi Qian had never been to the city library before. In her previous life, she had only been to the city bus station. She smiled and said, it shouldn't be too far. I want to buy more materials. She wanted to bring back all the textbooks and test papers for the 3rd year of junior high school. 10 minutes. Xia Jinyuan took a file from Chief Lu and walked slowly and elegantly ahead of her. My personal chauffeur is here. Student Yi, you can give me your orders at any time. Personal chauffeur. Yi Qian thought to herself. She was afraid of causing public outrage if she let a major be her personal chauffeur. When they arrived at the library, Yi Qian went straight to the middle school revision area on the 3rd floor. She picked out 5 sets of relatively difficult second-year comprehensive test papers. Next, she picked out the key knowledge for the 3rd year of junior high school and various test papers. Xia Jinyuan, who was standing next to her, wanted to give her some advice. However, when he saw her long and slender fingers swiping across the stack of test papers and comparing them, he knew that his advice was unnecessary. When Yi Qian picked up the 3rd year revision questions, Xia Jinyuan was not surprised either. He raised his eyebrows slightly and the interest in his dark eyes intensified. Do you plan to finish all the revision this year? Xia Jinyuan asked with a smile as he came out of the library with all the materials and test papers. Do you plan to study a bunch of revision materials during the summer break? Yi Qian got into the car and turned to look at the huge stack of materials on the back seat. The corners of her mouth curled up slightly as she said casually, yes, I'll give it a try. If I can devote all my time to training in the third year of junior high school. Xia Jinyuan, who was starting the car, paused for a few breaths. When he looked at her again, there was a hint of surprise in his dark eyes. The third year of junior high school. You mean you plan to finish all the second and third year textbooks by yourself in the first half of the year? Although he started working hard when he was 14 and was admitted to military school at 16, he did not completely study on his own. I do have such a plan. At present, it isn't a very difficult thing to do. I want to enter the provincial first high school. It's far from town. How could she waste her time? Yi Jian's arrangement for herself was almost harsh. What was hard work to her? How could she let down Grandpa Zhen and Principal Chen's painstaking efforts? Xia Jinyuan looked at her deeply. A pearl would always shine, and an unpolished jade would eventually become something useful. Her perseverance and patience were the foundation of her success. It would allow her to walk steadily to the peak of her life step by step. Work hard. Don't disappoint the efforts of the two seniors. If you can take each step steadily, it will be the greatest reward for them. Xia Jinyuan, who had already steadily driven the car to the city, spoke to Yi Jian in a gentle voice. Yi Jian was trying her best not to let him down and not to let her seniors down. Yi Jian nodded gently and picked up a set of test papers to read slowly. Chapter 95. Her jet black hair cascaded down her shoulders, and her delicate profile was so serious that Xia Jinyuan couldn't bear to speak anymore. His gaze inadvertently slid past her beautiful swan-like neck, lingering on it for a few seconds before he calmly looked away. Yi Qian, who was already captivated by the questions, didn't notice his gaze. Her fair and slender fingers would occasionally lightly swipe across the test paper as she worked on the last difficult question. At around 10:20, Xia Jinyuan started to get busy. The communicator in the car would occasionally beep with the sound of someone reporting work. Yi Qian, who had already finished a test paper, saw this and decided to sleep in the back seat before they got on the highway so as not to disturb his work. Xia Jinyuan, who was at work, was calm and deep. His innate noble temperament was reflected in his every word and action, and he was born with the demeanor of a leader. Confidence, calmness, seriousness. Yi Qian learned a lot about the qualities a soldier should have from him. Perhaps because she only slept for 2 to 3 hours last night, Yi Qian felt like she was listening to a lullaby as she listened to Xia Jinyuan's steady and deep voice. She slowly closed her eyes and didn't even know when she fell asleep. By the time she woke up, the car had already exited the highway and entered the national highway, heading towards town. It happened to be 3 in the afternoon when they arrived in Fujian town. Yi Qian didn't go back to school, but went straight to the recruit assembly camp. There were 2 language classes in the afternoon, and teacher Cook probably didn't want to see her. I've packed everything, and this. Xia Jinyuan didn't drive the car into the camp, but parked it outside. He opened the trunk of the car and took out a bag with the words Xinhua Bookstore printed on it. Inside the bag were a few military books he bought yesterday. There are 4 books here that you can take a look at. They're all basic military knowledge. Yi Qian realized that the basic military books she saw in the car yesterday were actually for her. She didn't refuse and only hesitated for a moment before accepting them. She smiled and thanked him graciously. After his car drove out of her sight, Yi Qian looked at the books he gave her and sighed softly before walking back to the camp. After returning to the dorm, she placed her test papers on the bookshelf one by one. When she was about to organize the 4 books Xia Jinyuan gave her, she opened the bag and saw the file she saw in his hands at the Public Security Bureau. It was folded neatly and sandwiched between the books. Yi Qian. Her name was written forcefully on the portfolio. Her handwriting was just like her. Looking at it, one could feel a sense of coldness assaulting one's senses. Yi Jian's fingers gently pinched the file, and a dazzling light suddenly burst out from her starry eyes. Her little face instantly bloomed like a peach blossom, bright and dazzling. The silver wire. The wire. The wire. It was as if she couldn't wait to open it. She held the coiled silver wire in her hand and gently uncoiled it one by one. The front and back ends of the wire skillfully wrapped around her left and right hands. The cool touch seemed to seep into her heart. Just like last night, she let the silver wire coil around her hands. It was as if she was holding a living thing in her hands. She could do whatever she wanted. With a soft whoosh, the silver thread pierced through the air and tightly wrapped around the bed frame. When Yi Jian's bright eyes retracted the silver thread, they were overflowing with splendor and elegance. When they moved, they were like peaches and plums, and when they were still, they were like orchids in an empty valley. He actually gave it to her. He took it out of the Public Security Bureau and gave it to her. Chapter 96. But the surprise only lasted for a moment. Very quickly, the radiance on her beautiful face faded and Dai Qing's brows furrowed slightly. Was it really okay to just give it to her like this? No, she had to ask him. Otherwise, she would feel uneasy even if she accepted it. Since Battalion Commander Yang was not around, Yi Qian simply carried her backpack and went to the school to look for Principal Qin. Principal Qin should know. From the campsite to the national highway, Yi Qian did not slow down at all. She kept running. In front of her, in a white van, a middle-aged man who looked like a teacher and was dressed decently happened to see the running figure in the rearview mirror. He noticed that the girl, who looked like a student, was only about the same distance behind the van even after they had driven for several kilometers. He said to the driver, "Old Huang, how many kilometers per hour are you driving? The girl behind you can almost catch up to you." 60 kilometers per hour. Although Fujian town is lagging behind, there is still a lot of traffic. Don't think it's slow. Driver Huang explained with a smile. He could not see the running figure, so he did not understand why the middle-aged man was teasing him. When the middle-aged man heard this, he said to the two teachers sitting behind him in surprise, "Quick, look behind you. That girl has already run several kilometers behind the van. The distance is about the same as before. Her endurance is amazing." The two teachers with serious expressions pushed open the window and looked behind them. They were also surprised. She looks like a student. But Fujian Town Middle School is still in class. Student, skipping class. A female teacher in her 40s asked, "Principal Chow, why don't we stop the van? If she's a student, she can come with us. What do you think?" Yi Qian did not expect to be able to hitch a ride after running for so long. After she got into the van, Principal Chow looked at the girl who was only breathing slightly and teased her again, "Student, you jumped into the van so boldly. Aren't you afraid that we will take you away?" After he asked, the two teachers sitting with Yi Qian looked at her with smiles and waited for her answer with interest. "You don't smell like chalk dust, but you have black and red ink on your hands. There is also red ink on your thumb. Let me guess, you should be the principal," Yi Qian said with a smile. His words stunned Principal Chow. "You can tell what position it is from this." "Of course. When I got on the car, this teacher even smiled politely at you. I can tell that she respects you very much." Why did he say that the middle-aged woman beside him was a teacher? The answer was obvious. She had the smell of chalk dust on her. Principal Chow was already laughing out loud. "Then, I might also be the dean." Before he finished speaking, Principal Chow thought of something and laughed even louder. There aren't many humorous deans in the dean's office. I say, student, your observation skills are pretty good. Since they had already guessed that he was the principal, there was no need to guess who Song Laosher and Zhu Laosher were. Actually, Yi Qian had not only guessed that he was the principal, he could also vaguely guess which school he was from. The person who came to Fujiyuan Town Middle School at this time should be the principal of the provincial first high school. Principal Chen was already waiting at the school gate. When Yi Qian got out of the van, he was shocked. Why did the little girl come with old Chow? The two principals were already exchanging greetings. Yi Qian bowed slightly to the two teachers. It seemed that he would disturb Principal Chen after he was done with his work. He did not go to the classroom. Instead, he went to Enjussen's dormitory and waited for the last class to end. Chapter 97. I just bumped into a student from your school. She's not bad. As soon as he entered the office, Principal Chow mentioned Yi Qian, who he had bumped into in the car. He looked very interested. Her endurance is not bad. Is she a sports special student? He admired Yi Qian. Principal Chen also felt proud. He smiled and said, Yi Qian. Her name is Yi Qian. Old Chow, your taste is still as sharp as ever. He turned around and handed a cup of tea to Principal Chow. Try this. It's a new tea from the mountains. The two principals had known each other for many years, so there was no need for formalities. They were more familiar with each other like old colleagues. It's good tea. It's not any worse than the tea outside. Principal Chow took a sip and smiled at his old colleague who wanted to change the topic. Come, let's continue talking about Yi Qian. Our country has achieved good results in sports competitions in the past 2 years. However, we still have some regrets in track and field, long-distance running, and sprinting. I think Yi Qian is a good seedling in this area. She can definitely develop in this direction. Principal Chow, who was an athlete, had always liked to explore the potential of students in sports in various secondary schools. If he nurtured them well, they would not only bring glory to the school, but also to the country. As the top high school in the province, the sports special students from First High School had all achieved good results in various competitions. A few students had even made it to the university games and achieved amazing results. However, Principal Chen was not very interested in this. He took a sip of tea and smiled. This child is indeed not bad. She is excellent in all aspects. However, I don't plan to let her achieve good results in sports. Why is that? Principal Chow said in surprise. This is not your style, old Chin. Downstairs, in the office. The arrival of the two teachers from First High School made the teachers in the office very happy. This showed how much importance First High School placed on this competition. The stacks of test papers that were brought over from the province's number 1 high school were distributed to the class teachers of the second and third year classes. Suddenly, the entire office was filled with the smell of books and ink. It really became a sea of learning. When Teacher Ko came in, he saw Class 1's homeroom teacher, Teacher Liu, actively recommending several top students in his class. His face was sharp and mean, and he snorted coldly. Then, he changed his face and walked over with a smile. When Teacher Liu saw her, she smiled and said, Teacher Song, this is Teacher Ko from Class 2. Yi Ying and Yi Qian are Teacher Ko's students. At the mention of Yi Qian, the smile on Teacher Ko's face was quite deep, but when he heard Yi Qian's name, his smile froze. Teacher Liu should be done with his work, right? Do you mind if I speak to Teacher Song? With a fake smile, Teacher Ko stared at Teacher Liu, who thought that he had given her a difficult problem. She smiled coldly and said, "Let me speak to the students in my class. I'm afraid Teacher Lu doesn't know much about them." The teachers in the office were used to her sarcastic tone. Teacher Lu smiled disapprovingly and was busy distributing the test papers from First High School to the teachers of each subject. Mr. Song from First High School frowned slightly. His impression of Mr. Kuo suddenly became much worse. As a teacher, he didn't say much, but his attitude was a little cold. Chapter 98. Yi Qian, who was in the dormitory, had no idea that Teacher Kuo was trying her best to discredit her. She said to Enchanting, "I bought a few sets of test papers. Let's do them together tomorrow. There are midterm exams next week, and the provincial high school exams on Saturday, Sunday, and Sunday. It's going to be a little hard to endure for 4 consecutive days." She even sighed, which made Enchanting roll her eyes. All right. You're the most stressful person in class. You even took leave. You don't know how dark Teacher Ku's expression is today. The whole class is living in fear and trepidation, afraid of provoking her bad luck. Zhang Na, who was in the same dormitory as her, said emotionally, "None of us dare to go near her. Yi Qian, the whole class is waiting for you to come back and destroy Teacher Ku's dark expression. Are you sure I can do it?" Yi Qian raised her eyebrows and smiled at the girls who nodded in agreement. "I didn't go to the classroom because I was afraid that you would be washed away by the storm. That's why I waited for you in the dormitory." The students more or less knew that Yi Qian and Teacher Kuo did not have a good teacher-student relationship. Hearing this, they all laughed coquettishly. Sometimes, they really admired Yi Qian. She was the only one who could withstand Teacher Ku's gaze. If it were any other student, their legs would have turned to jelly, or they would have transferred classes. Yi Ying's voice came from outside. She was still full of confidence. The girls in the dormitory snorted at the same time and said to Yi Qian, "Recently, Gao Yang has been coming to the classroom from time to time to tutor us. The two of them are sitting together openly. In the end, Teacher Kuo even told us to learn from them. It can't be helped. Those two have always been in the top 5 of the cohort." Zhang Na snorted in dissatisfaction and rolled her eyes. It's obvious that they're in love at a young age. The pettiness of a little girl could be seen at a glance. Yi Qian pursed her lips and laughed softly. It was already dinner time for the school. When they reached the cafeteria, Enchanting gently poked Yi Qian's forearm with her finger. Do you see? She's smiling like a flower. I also suspect that the two of them are dating." At the entrance of the cafeteria, the smiling Yi Ying and the tall and cold Gao Yang walked in together. The two of them immediately attracted countless gazes with various meanings. The people involved did not seem to care at all. They chatted and laughed as they walked towards Yi Qian and the others. It was inevitable that they would bump into each other. As soon as Gao Yang saw Yi Qian, he remembered how she had kicked him and his car. His cold face revealed a trace of uneasiness as he said to Yi Ying, "Go line up over there. There are fewer people." Yi Ying, who had always been scheming, glanced at Gao Yang's face and narrowed her beautiful eyes. "Why do I feel like he and Yi Qian are hiding something from me?" He smiled naturally and generously. "It's okay, it's the same no matter where you line it up. Didn't the head of teaching say that? After dinner, let's hurry to the teacher's office. Let's queue here." After she finished speaking, she naturally tugged on Gao Yang's sleeve and lined up behind Yi Qian. In that instant, Enchanting understood why Yi Qian said that she was not simple. If she were in Yi Qian's shoes, she would feel uncomfortable standing in the same place as someone who had bad blood with them. But fine, Yi Qian was not simple either. Seeing her nonchalant expression, Enchanting shrugged, indicating that she did not care either. Chapter 99. Principal Chin, Principal Chow, and the teachers from the provincial first high school were all sitting in the meeting room after dinner. At the same time, there were also the homeroom teachers from the second and third grades. No one said anything. They were all waiting for the two principals to finish reading the list. Teacher Ku, who was sitting in the middle, froze when he saw Headmaster Chin flipping through the registration form for the second year of middle school. He had never seen the headmaster attend any competitions in the past. Why was he looking at it this time? There were 7 grades in the second grade. 5 to 6 students from each grade would sign up for the competition. They were all the top 10 students in the class. Headmaster Chin flipped through all the registration forms for the second year of junior high school, but he didn't see Yi Jian's registration form. Teacher Ku, can I see the name list of Yi Qian's students? Principal Chin closed the registration form and looked sharply at Teacher Ku, who had repeatedly made things difficult for Yi Qian. He said in a deep voice, Teacher Ku, please hand it over personally. Teacher Ku's face was pale. She stood up quickly. Under the gaze of her colleagues, her face burned painfully. I'm sorry. I forgot to take it. I'll go get it right away. It was as if they were fleeing for their lives. 5 minutes later, Principal Chow held Yi Qian's registration form and said with interest, she's very confident. She signed up for everything. He glanced at Teacher Ku, who had not lifted her head since she came in. He chuckled and said, if she's really an all-rounder, it's not impossible to make an exception and admit her. She doesn't know anything. Teacher Ku, who had her head lowered, panicked when she heard this. She looked up and explained, Principal Chow, Yi Qian is a bad student. There's no such thing as a top student, and there's no such thing as a bad student. Teacher Ku, please be careful with your words. Principal Chow interrupted her with a smile and said kindly, whether she's a bad student or not, we'll know in the exam today. The self-study session is at 7 o'clock. Teachers, please get ready. The first mock exam will be at 7 o'clock sharp. No one listened to her explanation. They all stood up to inform their students. In the dean's office, Teacher Ku handed over the 2 test papers. The 2 of you are representing the school. Take a look at this first. After 7 o'clock, you will have a mock exam. Thank you, Director Ku. When Ying heard this, she could not wait to reach out her hand. However, she was pulled back by Gao Yang. He said coldly, are you asking us to cheat? When he said that, Ying became anxious. Gao Yang. What nonsense are you spouting? Dean Ku wants us to do better. He wants us to look at the questions in advance, not the answers. Wasn't reading the questions in advance cheating? Yi Qian, who was personally informed by Principal Chin, smiled faintly. Don't worry, I've said it before. Yi Ying is the opponent I need to defeat. So, how could I let her have the chance to defeat me? So what if she has seen the test papers? I can still win beautifully. Her face was full of confidence, and there was even a hint of disdain in her jet-black eyes. Principal Chen, who was originally a little worried, raised his eyebrows and laughed heartily. If you want to suppress your opponent, little girl, then you have to give him a hard time. Even if he does, he has to be below you. This was only natural. How could he let Ying have her way? In the temporary classroom of grade 12 class 1, Yi Qian took out one of the test papers and handed the rest to the students behind him. He picked up a pen and started writing. Chapter 100. At night, the school was less noisy and quieter than during the day. On the 5th floor of the teaching block, the classroom of grade 12 class 1 was a little more solemn. The only sound that could be heard in the classroom was the pen tip gliding across the paper. All of the students' gazes were focused as they concentrated on their own test papers. Yi Qian's pen seemed to move faster than the other students. He wrote down the answer almost without thinking. There was no hesitation or pause. It was as if he was taking notes in class. There was no sense of stagnation at all. The two provincial first middle school teachers scanned the top students in Fujian Town Middle School. A total of 62 students from grade 2 and grade 3 had signed up for the competition. After this round of preliminaries, it was estimated that half of them would be eliminated. There was only one reason why Principal Chow chose the second day of the midterm exam for the second round of selections, to strengthen the competition. They needed to know which students performed consistently in the 4 days of exams. They also needed to know which students had stage fright or were unable to persevere in the middle of the exam. If they stood out in this competition, then Ms. Song, who had walked to Yi Qian's side, smiled. No wonder Principal Chin didn't give face to Ms. Ku. It was unbelievable that such an outstanding student was suppressed by his own form teacher. She had been teaching for more than 20 years and this was the first time she had encountered such a situation. After standing there for less than 3 minutes, Ms. Song's eyes narrowed slightly. Then she quietly walked to Mr. Zhu, who taught mathematics in the top class of the province's first middle school, and whispered, "Mr. Zhu, go take a look at her." To be able to attract the attention of a teacher on the spot, one had to either be cheating or a top student. Mr. Zhu was the only teacher in the province who had participated in the National Mathematical Olympiad questions. He had also taken students overseas to participate in mathematical Olympiad competitions. When he walked to Yi Qian's desk, his legs seemed to have grown roots and he couldn't move. The two teachers took turns standing in front of a student's desk. They had inadvertently attracted the attention of some students. Yi Ying was one of them. Seeing this, the light in her beautiful eyes was like dirty well water, full of gloominess and coldness. The ballpoint pen in her hand seemed to be about to be broken in half. She was so strong that the veins on the back of her hand could be clearly seen. No matter how attentive Yi Jian was, she couldn't ignore that cold gaze that seemed to be stained with dirty water. He raised his eyes indifferently, and his gaze seemed to inadvertently sweep across the front. His gaze paused for a few seconds on Yi Ying's face, who was a row away, and he returned her a cold smile. Her smile was so dazzling, and it even contained disdain towards him. Yi Ying had already gritted her teeth, and the gloominess in her beautiful eyes deepened. She glared fiercely at Yi Qian. Just as she was about to lose control of her emotions, she seemed to have thought of something. She took a deep breath, bit her tongue to control her emotions, and looked away. No, I can't let Yi Qian affect me. Her father was right. When she didn't have the ability to deal with Yi Qian, the first thing she had to learn was to endure. Yi Qian, who had seen her reaction, lowered her eyes, and a hint of coldness appeared in her dark, watery eyes. Yi Ying was able to succeed in her previous life not only because of her own ability, but also because of Yi Zhifan, who gave her advice. You don't know the last question. She hesitated for a long time, and this made Mr. Zhu, who was standing next to her, anxious. This question is a little difficult, but it's all learned in the second year of middle school. Think carefully. Chapter 101. The last question, geometry, was from the Provincial Math Olympiad 2 years ago. It was difficult, but not difficult. Yi Qian did not expect her teacher to be so anxious when she exchanged glances with Yi Ying. She put her pen down again and wrote down the steps she had in her mind. Finally, she wrote down the correct answer. She had just written down the answer when the paper in front of her was taken away. The teacher's voice came from above, "Sit here and don't move." You can leave after I correct it. Being the first to hand in the paper always gave the other students a lot of pressure. Gao Yang, who was sitting at the back, already pursed his lips. Did she finish it so quickly? Or did she get caught cheating? No, that couldn't be right. If she was caught cheating, the teacher wouldn't be so agitated and she wouldn't be sitting quietly in the classroom. Then, she must have finished it. Gao Yang could not hide the surprise in his cold eyes. He frowned and looked in the direction of Ying. Seeing that the girl he admired was focused on the questions and was not affected at all, his frown eased. Teacher Zhu, who was marking the papers at the podium, was already cheering in her heart. She took very little time and got it 100% correct. No wonder Principal Chow had to come personally. This town's middle school was really talented. The rest of the students were still in the middle of the exam, but Teacher Zhu had already finished marking Yi Qian's paper. Not bad, you can leave the exam room. There was no mention of the score, but it could be seen from Yi Qian's expression and words that she had done well. She was in a hurry to find Principal Chin. She politely said, "Goodbye, teacher." Then she picked up the only ballpoint pen she had brought into the classroom, got up, and left quickly. Behind her, Yi Qian's footsteps and expression did not change in the slightest, no matter how surprised she was being. Today, she was not just here for the exam. The most important thing had not been done yet. Is this a gift from Captain Xia? In the office, Principal Chin held a long and thin silver wire made of a special material that shimmered coldly under the light. Soft, tough. This special material was really rare. Why would he give her a gift without any reason? Why would he give the girl a weapon from the suspect's hands? Not to mention the lass, even this old man wanted to know. Since such a good thing has been given, just accept it. Wouldn't it be a waste of Captain Xia's good intentions if we return it? Principal Chin chuckled and gestured for Yi Qian to reach out and wrap the silver wire around Yi Qian's slender and fair wrist. This is a good thing. Take it since I've given it to you. It was a good treasure. Even if it was a bracelet, it would still be beautiful. Most importantly, it's not against the law. Yi Qian was dumbfounded. He stammered, this isn't power. Ha ha ha. Silly girl. Principal Chin saw the unconcealable surprise on her little face and the faint worry in her dark eyes. His laughter grew louder. Girl, this is from Captain Xia. Keep it well. You don't have to worry about anything else. If Principal Chin said he would accept it, then he would definitely accept it. She replied with a smile, then I'll accept it. I'm not afraid of being laughed at, but I really like it. I'm just afraid that if I accept it, it will affect Captain Xia. So I came to ask you for a peace of mind. Clever girl. Principal Chen's laughter became even louder. Little girl, you're right. After laughing, he asked about the exam. Yi Qian arched her eyebrows and smiled faintly. Her eyes were bright and sparkling. Don't worry. I always mean what I say. Chapter 102. What she had said and done, as well as what others had said and done. She remembered all of it. Since Principal Chow was still around, Yi Qian had to complete tonight's training by himself. After bidding farewell to Principal Chin, she jogged out of school and rushed to the recruit camp. Gao Yang, who was pushing his bicycle, saw a slender figure jogging past the yellow lights of the school gate and disappearing into the night without stopping. It was Yi Qian. 2 minutes later, the person he was waiting for. Yi Ying jogged over. Unlike Yi Qian's swift and decisive movements, she was like a flower that needed to be cared for. She had to pause for a moment before continuing. She had a heart problem, so running and strenuous activities were not suitable for her. What kind of person is Yi Qian normally? After Gao Yang, who was sitting on the back seat of the bicycle with Yi Ying, had driven some distance away, the young man's low, hoarse, and slightly puzzled voice could be heard in the cool night breeze. I didn't notice any strong points in her before, but now it seems like she's been hiding it on purpose. He didn't have any other intentions, he was just asking his own question. Yi Ying's expression changed. She gripped his shirt tightly and smiled. I don't know, I've never been on good terms with her. You'll have to ask her yourself to see if she's hiding them. What's going on? Gao Yang had been paying more and more attention to Yi Qian these past few days. Forget it, I'm just asking, he answered indifferently and didn't ask any more questions. She had been kicked, she had been beaten. She had to leave a deeper impression. From Monday to Wednesday, Yi Jian's figure would appear in the classroom of grade 12 class 1 for every exam in the 3 subjects of mathematics, physics, and chemistry. After 3 days, it had caused quite a stir in the entire grade. Bad rumors began to spread around the school. The general idea was, bad students make more trouble. Did you hear that? Bad students make more trouble. I have to add, ugly people make more trouble. As soon as Yi Qian entered the classroom, he heard He Jiamin gloating over his misfortune. He could tell that she was deliberately saying it for him to hear. Tan Wei frowned and tugged at He Jiamin's sleeve. Lower your voice. Why should I speak softly? I'm telling the truth. He Jiamin, who had finally vented her anger, would not let go of the opportunity to step on Yi Qian. She stood up, raised her chin and said provocatively, if you want to make a fool of yourself, then don't blame the bystanders for talking too much. When Enjiesin heard this, she was furious. She rolled up her sleeves and was about to rush over. He Jiamin, you're really capable. If you have the ability, go ahead and do it yourself. If she could go anywhere, Zhang Na said airily. Only incompetent people would go around making trouble. Yi Qian, who was standing in the middle, smiled and patted their shoulders. His gaze was straight and cold. He said with a faint smile, do you know why I don't want to talk to a certain someone? It's just a feeling. If I look at her for too long, I'll have nightmares for days. It's true that ugly people make more trouble. Others had already bullied him, if he didn't return the favor, how could he? In the land of etiquette, he naturally had to return the favor. When He Jiamin heard Yi Qian call her ugly, her face instantly twisted. She pounced over as if she was going to bite him. Yi Qian, I'll let you be smug, I'll let you be smug. Are you sure you want to fight? Yi Qian walked over. His cold gaze had a hint of ruthlessness. He smiled and said, I realized that you have a bad memory. That's good too. Let's fight and you'll remember. Chapter 103. Yi Ying, who had been listening for a long time, looked gloomy. She grabbed He Jiamin who had rushed out and whispered, class is about to start. Do you want to be scolded by the teacher? Oh no, I almost forgot that Yi Qian is quite good at fighting. At the mention of the past, He Jiamin, who was arrogant just a second ago, was defeated the next second. Her eyes flickered as she returned to her seat dejectedly. When the surrounding students saw this, they more or less looked down on He Jiamin. Not only did she bully her own classmates, but she was also as timid as a mouse. They didn't know where she got the courage to go against Yi Qian. At noon, the broadcast announced the names of the students who had been selected for the competition. When Yi Jian's name was broadcasted again, the sound of people gasping could be heard everywhere in the school. Yi Qian from Year 2's Class 2 even applied for English. English was the weak point of Town Middle School. Could she do it? Don't puff yourself up at your own cost. Teacher Huang, the English teacher who was eating in the staff cafeteria, let out a long sigh when she heard Yi Qian's name. Whether she would succeed or not, she didn't know. But at least one of the 2 classes she taught in year 2 had applied. Yi Qian applied for mathematics, physics, and chemistry, but it didn't cause much of a reaction. But when they found out that she applied for English, the reaction was huge. As long as there were students around, they would definitely hear that the most discussed topic was Yi Qian. As for the boys, the most discussed topic was Yi Qian's appearance. When it came to Yi Qian's appearance, no one said that she was ugly. I didn't realize she was pretty before. Now that I look at her, she's getting prettier. Her face is small and her facial features are exquisite. More importantly, have you noticed that she has an indescribable aura about her? Hey, you guys noticed it too. I thought I was mistaken. I just thought. Did she wear our school uniform incorrectly? She shouldn't be wearing the uniform. Gao Yang, who was listening to his classmates' irrelevant conversations, put down his spoon and sneered, "That's not what we're concerned about. Do you think she can do English?" Ha ha ha, Gao Yang, English isn't the point. The important thing is the beauty. The boy laughed heartily. Seeing that all the girls in the class were sneaking glances at him, he sighed and said sadly, "You have a beauty by your side. How can you understand our thoughts?" Gao Yang was already pursing his lips. English. Could she Yi Qian? After a while, he snorted coldly. Fine, let her make a fool of herself. Then she will know what it means to act according to one's ability. Yi Qian, who even the English teacher did not have high hopes for, ate his lunch without any pressure. Was it difficult for him to take the English test at night? Would he be sad about those unfamiliar, tongue-twisting medical books with especially long words? As for speaking, she had been a top tour guide for international tours, so speaking wasn't difficult for her. At this moment, the students' secret discussions about Yi Qian were already out in the open. The moment they saw him, they said, "Which Yi Qian from class 2, last time, Yi Qian used her super memory to shock more than 30 students. This time, she used another method to create a storm in the school." Her name was already being passed around by the students for the entire Thursday afternoon. The students who had seen Yi Qian's super memory felt that it might not be difficult for her. When they heard their classmates mention Yi Qian in an extremely sarcastic tone, they would also stand up for him. However, in the end, they chose to wait and see. Chapter 104. When Ying heard that Yi Qian was participating in the English competition, she chuckled. "You overestimate yourself." She believed that Yi Qian could do well in other subjects. But for English, the sun would rise from the west if she was not good at it. There were so many top students out there, and she even had to learn English. They were just waiting for her to make a fool of herself. As the deputy mayor, Yi Zhifan had a great influence on Ying. She was slowly learning how to plan ahead. But for Yi Qian, there were plenty of people waiting for her to make a fool of herself. It didn't matter if Yi Qian was there or not. Yi Qian walked into the classroom and found her seat, waiting for the exam papers to be handed out. The other 9 students, including Gao Yang, looked at Yi Qian subtly. The 9 of them were the top students in English in the 2nd and 3rd year. Yi Qian from the 2nd year class. Where did she get the confidence to even sign up for English? Gao Yang, who was sitting in the corner, saw this and pursed his lips into a straight line. Why did she have to embarrass herself in school? So many students were secretly laughing at her. Wouldn't it be better to keep a low profile? The teacher hadn't come in yet. Gao Yang stood up and walked behind a girl. Although his voice was cold, he was polite. "Hello, can I exchange seats with you?" There are 10 people in the exam, so you can sit anywhere. Yi Qian didn't turn around. It didn't matter who sat behind her. If you don't know how to do it, keep it. When the exam papers were handed out, Gao Yang's low and cold voice sounded. I'll give you the answer after I'm done. No matter what, she had to pass this test first. She couldn't let those talkative students say anything bad. Yi Qian was a girl after all. In front of her, Yi Qian, who had already started writing, stopped. She turned her head and looked at Gao Yang, who seemed to be planning for her. She smiled faintly and said, "You're confident in English because you've lived abroad, right?" "I'm helping you, Yi Qian." It didn't sound like he meant anything else, but it made him feel a little uncomfortable. "I am indeed confident." Yi Qian raised his eyebrows and smiled. His dark eyes shone like stars as he said, "What a coincidence. I'm also very confident in myself. I'm sorry, but I really don't care for your so-called help." "You?" Gao Yang's handsome face immediately changed. His eyes were cold as he stared at the figure who was already sitting upright. "Yi Qian, don't be ungrateful." TSK, what should I do?" She didn't know what was good for her. With the sound of the tape turning, the first question, listening, began. No matter how angry Gao Yang was, he could only give up. After the listening test was over, Yi Qian's pen flew across the paper. When it came to the last reading question, Yi Qian directly handed the paper to Teacher Song and politely said, "Goodbye." He left the 9 students who were still taking the exam. He didn't return to the classroom. Instead, he went straight to Enjussen's dormitory to pick up his bag and leave the school. Tonight's training was to train the arm stability. Yi Qian, who didn't even put down his bag, immediately rushed to the training room. At this time, Principal Chin had already been waiting for a long time. The results of the exam were never the focus of their conversation. Principal Chin, who was holding a string of bells in his hand, gestured for Yi Qian to reach out his hand. "Put 5 kilograms of weight on your wrist for 30 minutes. Every time the bell rings, the time will be stacked for 10 minutes. As a sniper, the closer they got to the end, the crueler the training became." You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.